I mean, you watch Fox News, and it's just like nonstop. Oh, we're the victims of this. No, we're the victims of that. No, you know, it's kind of pathetic. But there's a real problem associated with this. There's a much larger issue here. And that is that without two healthy political parties, and I would actually say without multiple healthy political parties, but the problem is here in the United States, we have a two-party system because we're one of only 7 democracies in the world that has first-past-the-post, winner-take-all elections. Pretty much everybody else uses a parliamentary system. In a parliamentary system, if a party gets 22% of the vote, they get 22% of the seats in parliament. So you have, you know, multiple robust political parties. But in a first-past-the-post, winner-take-all, in other words, it's all or nothing, 51% determines everything. You always end up with a two-party system, and that's what we have in the United States. And of course, the Republican Party has sought to exploit this for years and years and years, promoting, for example, Jill Stein in the 2016 election, for example. The Republicans helping fund that, not to mention the Russians. But the bottom line is we've got this two-party system. And here's where the problem comes as the Republican Party gets smaller and becomes more regional. Without having two competitive parties, there is nothing to restrain political corruption, essentially. It is the competition between two parties that purges both parties of political corruption. When you have one party that just basically rules with an iron fist and has for a long, long time and is never, almost never anyway, successfully challenged by the other party, that party, that ruling party tends to become sclerotic. It tends to become corrupt. I mean, we see this in, frankly, we see this in both parties. You see this in the corruption in the Democratic Party in New York State, which is legendary. And, you know, because they haven't had a serious challenge from Republicans, New York State has not been out of the control of Democrats in forever. And you see this in Republican-controlled states like, you know, Mississippi and Florida and Texas and Alabama. And, I mean, you know, we could go on. Tennessee, where recently, you know, they expelled 3 members, for example, 4 members. So, no, 3 members. So it's not a good thing for the country. But it's not my job to fix the Republican Party. Apparently, though, you know, the Koch network, Americans for Prosperity, the group funded heavily by the right-wing billionaires, thinks it is theirs. They just dropped an ad this morning basically trashing Donald Trump and saying that, you know, Donald Trump is a loser and you know, we need to move on. In fact, they literally use that phrase. You'll recall MoveOn.org dates its genesis back to, I believe it was 1997, when Bill Clinton was being prosecuted or persecuted, your choice, for Monica Lewinsky. And they came out and said, you know, it's time to move on from this. Let's get back to governing the country. Well, this is what the Koch network is now saying, is time to move on. I mean, literally, that's what it says in their new ad. So a couple of questions here, and I'll put them on the table and we can talk about it if you'd like. What will the consequences be for the Republican Party itself and for the Democratic Party if the Republican Party continues down this road of being a smaller and smaller and more regional political party and more corrupt? I mean, in particular, you see this right now, for example, in Ohio, where the Republican Party is just insane, so insanely corrupt that the Republican Speaker of the House in Ohio, I believe, might be the Senate leader, it's one or the other. I mean, it's just up to his eyeballs in corruption scandals. Mike DeWine gets away with an awful lot because he just seems like a nice guy, but some really awful policies. And the corruption is terrible. So, number one, what does this mean for the future of the Republican Party? how does the Democratic Party, lacking a party that has, that actually can hold them to account? I mean, we saw this, a little tiny bit of this here in Oregon, where, we had an elected official, or a Democratic elected official, who is now under federal investigation for corruption. Because the Republican Party in Oregon has just become nothing but an obstruction party. All they're doing, they're refusing to show up for the legislative session. Hundreds of pieces of legislation now are in limbo. Lots of important stuff is not getting done. So where does this go? How does this work out? I mean, we're seeing these differences. States are embracing guns, book bans, abortion bans, pollution, more pollution. Blue states are leading the way into pluralism, a clean energy future, and rebuilding their schools and infrastructures. Everybody in Oregon votes by mail and has for a quarter century, and we're one of 5 states where that's the case. Texas, Republicans just made it very hard for anybody to vote by mail, particularly in Houston, which is the all-blue city in Texas. A woman in California can get an abortion basically any time within the constraints of the old Roe v. Wade guidelines. A woman in Texas who tries to do this could end up in jail, or at least her family members could. She could get stalked. She can get hit with a $10,000 lawsuit. What does this mean for the future of America? In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free, and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We take life back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Defying Hitler by Sebastian Haffner, a memoir. This is from chapter 17, about a little more than a third of the way into the book. At first, the revolution only gave the impression of being an historical event like any other, a matter for the press that might just possibly have some effect on the public mood. The Nazis celebrate January 30th as their day of revolution. They are wrong. There was no revolution on January 30th, 1933, just a change of government. Hitler became chancellor, by no means the Führer of the Nazi regime. The cabinet contained only 2 Nazis apart from him. He swore an oath of allegiance to the Weimar Constitution. The general opinion was that it was not the Nazis who had won, but the bourgeois parties of the right, who had captured, in quotes, the Nazis and held all the key positions in the government. In constitutional terms, events had taken a much more conventional, unrevolutionary course than most of what had happened during the previous 6 months. Outwardly also, the day had no revolutionary aspects, unless one considers a Nazi torchlight procession through Wilhelmstrasse or a minor gunfight in the suburbs that night as signs of a revolution. For most of us outsiders, the experience of January 30th, 1933 was that of reading the papers, and the emotions we felt while we were doing so. The morning headline was, "Hitler called to president." That produced a certain nervous, impotent irritation. Hitler had been called to the president in August and November. He had been offered the vice chancellorship and then the chancellorship. Both times he had set impossible conditions, and both times there had been solemn declarations, "Never again." Each time, "never again," had lasted exactly 3 months. Hitler's opponents in Germany at that time suffered from a compulsive urge to offer him everything he wanted, indefatigably, and at an even cheaper price, indeed to press it upon him. It's the same now with his opponents outside Germany. Again and again, this appeasement was formally renounced, and again it gaily reappeared at the crucial moment. Just so today. Then, as now, one's only hope was Hitler's own unreasonableness. Would it not sooner or later exhaust the patience of his opponents? Then, as now, it became apparent that their patience knew no bounds. At midday, the headline said, "Hitler makes impossible demands." We nodded, half reassured. It was only too credible. It would have gone against his nature to ask for less than too much. Perhaps the cup had once more passed from us. Hitler, the last defense against Hitler. At about 5 o'clock, the evening papers arrived. Cabinet of National Unity formed Hitler Reichschancellor. I don't know what the general reaction was. For about a minute, mine was completely correct. Icy horror. Certainly this had been a possibility for a long time. You had to reckon with it. Nevertheless, it was so bizarre, so incredible to read it now in black and white. Hitler Reichschancellor. For a moment, I physically sensed the man's odor of blood and filth, the nauseating approach of a man-eating animal, its foul, sharp claws in my face. Then I shook the sensation off, tried to smile, started to consider, and found many reasons for reassurance. That evening, I discussed the prospects of the new government with my father. We agreed it had a good chance of doing a lot of damage, but not much chance of surviving very long. A deeply reactionary government with Hitler as its mouthpiece. Apart from this, it did not really differ much from the two governments that had succeeded Bruning's. Even with the Nazis, it would not have a majority in the Reichstag. Of course, that could always be dissolved, but the government had a clear majority of the population against it, in particular the working class, which would probably go communist now that the Social Democrats had completely discredited themselves. One could prohibit the communists, but that would only make them more dangerous. In the meantime, the government would be likely to implement reactionary social and cultural measures with some anti-Semitic additions to please Hitler. That would not attract any of its opponents to its side. Foreign policy would probably be a matter of banging the table. There might be an attempt to rearm. That would automatically add the outside world to the 60% of the home population who were against the Hitler government. Besides, who were the people who had suddenly started voting Nazi in the last 3 years? Misguided ignoramuses, for the most part, victims of propaganda, a fluctuating mass that would fall apart at the first disappointment. No, all things considered, this government was not a cause for alarm. The only question was what would come after it. It was possible that they would drive the country to civil war. The communists were capable of going on the attack before a prohibition against them came into force. The next day, this turned out to be the general opinion of the intelligent press. It is curious how plausible an argument it is, even today, when we know what came next. How could things turn out so completely different? Perhaps it was just because we were all so certain that they could not do so, and relied on that with far too much confidence. So we neglected to consider that it might, if worse came to worse, be necessary to prevent the disaster from happening. Through the whole of February 1933, everything that happened remained a matter for the press. In other words, it took place in an arena that would lose all reality for 99% of the population the moment there were no newspapers. Admittedly, enough occurred in that arena. The Reichstag was dissolved. Then in a flagrant breach of the Constitution, Hindenburg also dissolved the Prussian regional parliament. There were fast and furious changes of personnel in the civil service. The book Defying Hitler.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hey, happy brand new week. Just a reminder, tonight I'll be at Powell's City of Books at 7 p.m. Pacific time, signing my newest book, The Hidden History of American Democracy, which I think is the best in the series. I think you'll find it absolutely amazing. And, tonight should be a lot of fun. So we got a lot to talk about today. It is, it's the first day of the week here, a brand new week. How long are politicians going to be able to ignore the planet becoming unlivable? And by politicians, I'm specifically referring to Joe Biden. I realize he's done a lot, but I would like more. I'll tell you about that in just a moment. Also, now they're demanding the death penalty for women who get abortions, and they are dead serious about it, no pun intended. And poor Leonard Leo. I mean, it's okay to discriminate against and hate on gay people, he says, or he gets the Supreme Court to say, but don't dare speak to him. I'll tell you about that in the first hour of the program. In the second hour of our program, Ron DeSantis has a new video. Well, actually, it's followers of his who have a new video, but he has not yet come out and condemned it. It's very weird and ends with stormtroopers heading towards spiraling, spinning. It kind of looks like a swastika. It is a Nazi piece of iconography. Also, Alabama and Florida have figured out how to cancel more Democratic votes, even defying court orders not to. I'll tell you about that in the second hour. And in the second hour, our Geeky Science, the science of how highly dominant men get endorsed as leaders during times of conflict and crisis. This is a fascinating study that just came out. In the third hour of our program, hey, it turns out that a lot of states are contracting with private insurance companies to administer their Medicaid, and those companies are ripping people off exactly the same way they're ripping people off with Medicare Advantage. I'll tell you about that at the beginning of the third hour of our program today. Also, what's next after the Israeli parliament approves part of the judicial overhaul? Is this going to stand? Is the gutted judiciary going to be able to continue to prosecute Netanyahu? I mean, this in a way, this is exactly what Donald Trump wants to do. Become president, take control of the government, and then drop all the charges against him. Keep in mind, Netanyahu's under indictment for corruption. And finally, in the third hour of the program, is the Department of Justice going after Greg Abbott about his un-humanitarian floating barriers. Yes, they are, sort of. They've issued a nasty letter. We'll get to that in the third hour of the program. So a lot to talk about today. And, of course, your calls at 202-808-9925. An awful lot, actually. But I wanted to start out with my piece today from Hartmann Report. It's titled, How Long Will Politicians Be Able to Ignore the Planet Becoming Unlivable? CBS News is reporting that people in Phoenix are rationing their air conditioning. A British climatologist has declared Phoenix the developed world's first city that is uninhabitable without air conditioning. In other words, uninhabitable unless you've got the money to pay for air conditioning. In large parts of the United States this summer, climate change-driven heat is these heat domes, which are the result of the jet stream collapsing, by the way, are making the pavement so hot that when people pass out from exhaustion or heat stroke, or in one guy's case, he was at a bus stop, he just sat down on the pavement and ended up burning his butt so badly he had to go to the ER, and they did skin grafts. I mean, people are ending up in the hospitals with second and third degree burns from just being in contact with the pavement. And don't even think about walking your dogs in weather like this. Dr. Kevin Foster, the director of the Arizona Burn Center, told the Canadian Broadcasting Company, we are seeing lots of patients who are falling down on the concrete pavement, asphalt, and suffering really, really deep burns as a result of that. He added that this frequency and severity of burns is twice the normal that we typically see. NBC News reports that the burns typically occur when people fall or pass out on sun-scorched pavement and other hot surfaces. Even being in contact with these surfaces for a very short period of time can do serious damage. They quote Dr. Kara Guerin, an emergency room doc in Phoenix. She says the burns can be very severe and disfiguring to the point where you have to have what's called a skin graft, where they take skin from other parts of your body and cover it up. In 2021, 40% of Americans lived in counties that were severely impacted by our current climate emergency, and over 600 Americans died from climate-related causes. In 2022, climate-related weather disasters cost the United States over $165 billion, according to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. This year will be the worst in human history, as an El Nino is driving a massive summer heat wave all across the northern hemisphere. The United Nations estimated that climate-related deaths will exceed cancer deaths among children, in our children's lifetimes. You know, we stand on the precipice of a disaster unlike anything humanity has ever faced. And a small group of fossil fuel billionaires and coal barons, you know, like Joe Manchin, are getting fabulously rich from humanity's misery while actively working to block solutions. They're using small parts of that revenue that they make from the fossil fuels, with the blessing of 5 corrupt Republicans on the Supreme Court, to pay off Republican politicians and a small handful of Democrats, Joe Manchin, to block any efforts to solve this crisis. So what do? Well, during World War II, President Roosevelt invoked the Emergency Powers Act. There are several of these. There's the actual National Emergencies Act, there's the Defense Production Act, and there's the Robert T. Stafford Relief and Emergency Assistance Act. And under these 3 pieces of legislation, according to a legal analysis done by the Center for Biological Diversity 2 years ago, the president, if he makes this declaration, could then ban new fossil fuel leasing. He could ban new fracking permits. He could establish a plan to phase out fossil fuel production. He could reallocate hundreds of billions of dollars currently subsidizing fossil fuel production toward the deployment of green energy. He could cap domestic fossil fuel emissions, and he could end the export of crude oil, coal, and refined fossil fuel products. And he could also veto any legislation that provides, immunity from lawsuits to the fossil fuel industry. The Republican Party is working on this one. And begin an investigation of the fossil fuel industry's cover-up of the science that they've known about and concealed for decades about the planet-destroying consequences of their products. I mean, this is something that could be done. And President Biden actually considered declaring such an emergency last year, but he stepped back from it. Varshani Prakash, the executive director of the Sunrise Movement, told Bloomberg, quote, "New York City looks like it's on fire. Kids are choking on dirty air, and the AQI is a serious health threat, equivalent to breathing in smoke from cigarettes. We're in a climate emergency, and it's absurd that our government isn't acting like it." And the Republicans know this. So what are the Republicans doing? What's the GOP doing? Well, they just proposed a new piece of legislation. It's called the Real Emergencies Act. It's in the House of Representatives. You'll recall last week Scott Perry, the congressman who was deeply embedded in the effort to overthrow our government in January of 2021. He just called climate change and people who are concerned about climate change grifters. It turns out, this is Julia Rock wrote about this over at The Lever News. Quote, "The Real Emergency Act's 7 sponsors in the Senate received a combined $3.1 million in contributions from fossil fuel industry executives and political action committees over the 2017 to 2022 election cycle. The bill's 19 House sponsors raked in $1.7 million from fossil fuel executives and PACs just during the 2021 through 2022 election cycle." You know, this is one of the great tragedies of Clarence Thomas casting that deciding vote in Citizens United that allows the bribery of politicians. Now, fossil fuel industry invests a few million in politicians. They make billions, hundreds of billions of dollars in profits. I mean, they've succeeded in buying so much of the GOP that you can't find a Republican who doesn't deny climate change. Or at the very least, if they say, yeah, it's there, you say, well, what do you want to do about it? Oh, let's plant 1 trillion trees. Yeah, right. Oh, God. So my bottom line here is that Biden needs to declare a climate emergency, and he needs to do it now. So how do we get this to him? I mean, this is Jeff Merkley, for example, my senator here from Oregon. He told the Washington Post this week, he said, this is a planetary emergency, and the president should declare an emergency. It's the biggest issue facing humankind. We're on a trajectory for a massive increase in climate chaos affecting us in every possible way. So the best way to lobby the president is through members of his party, senators and members of the House of Representatives who are Democrats. So if you are represented by one, or if you just want to call one in some other state, the phone number for the Congressional Switchboard is 202-224-3121. And you can also generally go through their website, which you can find with a quick online search, and email them. You know, take a few minutes today and make that call. If the fate of our planet, our fellow humans, and our future generations is literally hanging in the balance right now. And Biden can do this. I mean, if he does this, he acquires incredible new powers, which is why the Republicans are trying to pass legislation to prevent him from doing it. They know that this could, you know, hurt or at least not help their fossil fuel billionaire patrons. I mean, we're subsidizing that industry to the tune of $600 billion a year. What if we put that money toward putting solar panels on the roof of every house in America? It could be done.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's 17 minutes past the hour. We'll be back. The death penalty for abortions, seriously? Stick around. And welcome back. Maverick in Edmonds, Washington. Hey, Maverick, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, you know, Tom, nothing says pro-life like the death penalty, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, right. Yes,
Hey,
indeed. In fact, the anti-death penalty movement was the pro-life movement before 1975, when the anti-abortion movement literally stole that phrase. Prior to 75, if you said I'm pro-life, what it meant was you were opposed to the death penalty.
Yeah, I've heard you say that before. Hey, I wanted to talk about the Republicans and climate change.
Yeah, go for it.
Climate change denialism. But something's been bugging me real quick. You say on Friday's Jumo Mubarak or something? What in the wide world of sports is that? I can't even look it up because I don't know how to spell it.
Jumo Mubarak it means basically kind of happy Sabbath, only it's Arabic, and it's the word that Muslims say to each other on Friday. Friday is their Sabbath, Saturday is the Jewish Sabbath, Sunday is the Christian Sabbath. So I say TGIF, Shabbat Shalom, and Jumo Mubarak. That's because it hits all those religions. I don't have a Happy Sunday. I mean, there's not a typical Sunday greeting for Christians.
All right, thank you for that, clearing that up.
Mm-hmm.
So if you remember, Kevin McCarthy on the House floor proposed planting 1 trillion trees.
Right.
And why? To combat climate change, right? So if you follow me on this may be the first time that we've got Republican recognition at a higher level of Congress that there is a problem. So I think what we need to do is not push back on this one little bit, because even though it's an idea that's pretty unworkable, now this is out there, and it's going to be really hard for them to pull back on this based on what every one of us is seeing all around the world every day.
Well, I have no problem with planting 1 trillion trees. The problem, with trying to do it here in the United States is that there's not enough land in the United States for 1 trillion more trees.
Right, but my point is that the Republicans are admitting that there is a problem.
Oh, I get what you're saying,
This is new.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is new. So let them run with it. Because, like I said, it's going to be really hard to pull back from that, once they get started.
Well, that's a good point, and I should have incorporated that into my rant today about climate change. It's kind of a pathetic response. I mean, planting 1 trillion trees, nice idea, but A, it's going to take years. B, it's going to take decades for those trees to grow to the point where they are, substantial carbon sinks. And in the meantime, the Republicans don't want to do absolutely anything at all about the, the growing carbon in our atmosphere crisis, because that would cut into the profits of, the big oil companies and Koch Industries and all these other companies that make so much money off fossil fuels.
I know, but it's a start, and maybe the camel's nose under the proverbial tent, if you will.
That's a good point, Maverick. It hadn't occurred to me, and yeah, spot on. Okay, thank you. Thank you for that.
I'd have to admit that I didn't come up with it myself. I heard it from my most trusted journalist on the interweb there, Bo, the fifth column. But it seemed relevant, and I wanted to share it with you and your audience.
Yeah,
so
Bo,
thanks for your time,
Bo, the
Tom.
fifth column is great, isn't he? He does great work. Yeah, okay, thanks a lot, Maverick. It's a good one. Thank you. It's 21 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. When I was a little kid, my grandmother had a piano, and I loved to play it. I was incompetent, but I was figuring out all kinds of stuff. And then I kind of got away from it, and, you know, went to school, and things got busy, and just lost track of it. Well, now there's this fascinating new study out of the University of Geneva, Switzerland, that is making me think maybe I should go back and learn the piano. What they found was that they took a group of 132 healthy older adults, retired, 62 to 78 years old. Half of them learned the piano, half of them took music classes without learning the piano. And what they found was that those who learned the piano actually had the strongest increase in their memory, in their mental competence, their mental faculties. Those who took the music classes also did well, but learning the piano was a huge step. So check it out. There's a whole long rant about this over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. All righty, so the anti-abortion folks have been going out of their way to, well, here, you know, they're so conscious of language, right? I mean, you know, they've got these abortion bans in all these states, but now the word has gone out to Republicans and these anti-abortion freaks that don't use the word ban. They're now rules or regulations or you know, reasonable restrictions, but don't use the word bans. Right. Well, there is this group called Operation Save America. They hate gay people. In fact, they hate the whole queer community. They hate Muslims, but in particular, they hate women who have abortions. And they had a meeting on Friday, last Friday, and a meeting. This is a group of religious leaders from around the country. These are mostly evangelical Christians, mostly Protestant, although there are some Catholics in their group as well. And they want all Americans to follow God's law, what they say is God's law, you know, which is interesting. I mean, you know, read Deuteronomy. It says if your kids talk back to you, you're supposed to stone them to death. I mean, it's you know, if you eat shellfish, you're supposed to be stoned to death. I mean, these are both in the same part that says, you know, it's an abomination for a man to lie with a man. So I guess, you know, if we're supposed to pay attention to one, we're supposed to pay attention to all three. Although it doesn't mention abortion. But in any case, these guys got together, and I say guys because it was an all-male panel who met on Friday to discuss the best strategy to end abortion in America. And the conclusion that they came to is the death penalty for women who have abortions. I've been telling you all along this was coming. Just like we now have in 3 or 4 different states now, we have legislation introduced to ban birth control. Now, you know, and I've been telling you that's coming too. You know, when these freaks, they start with abortion, and for many people, you know, that sounds, well, some reasonable restrictions on abortion. I don't have a problem with that. They start there, but where they're going is the full Catholic, basically, which has now been adopted by evangelical Protestants, so it's kind of the full hardcore right-wing religious, I guess, which is no birth control, and if you get an abortion, you die by lethal injection in states that have that, or, you know, you spend the rest of your life in jail. One of the speakers was an anti-Islam guy, ironically given his name, Raymond Ibrahim, and he said, if you look at a country and the best they can come up with for a president is a woman, there's something wrong with that. That tells me something about the men when it comes to positions of authority and leadership. He's talking about the possibility that Kamala Harris may end up president someday. He said, if a woman's doing a man's job, that's woke. Can't have that. But the really bizarre part is that they have advocated for legislation in more than a dozen states, including Alabama, Arizona, Missouri, Kentucky, and Oklahoma. They call them equal protection bills. And what it means is that that little blob of tissue that's about the size of a grain of rice that just looks like a little blob of tissue at 6 weeks of pregnancy, that little blob of tissue has the exact same rights as you and me. And so if somebody kills that little blob of tissue, they get the death penalty. That's why they call them equal protection. They're equally protected. These people, by the way, also stole the word abolitionists from the civil rights movement, from the anti-slavery movement. They call themselves abolitionists. Why? Because they want to abolish abortion. They also want to abolish the 6-week bans. They say those are weak. And they don't want exceptions for rape, incest, and they're debating whether there should even be exceptions for the life of the mother. After all, these little blobs of tissue are sacred things, right?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
I get it. Some people actually consider the blobs of tissue sacred things, and that's okay. But when they want to put women to death for aborting them, I have a problem with it. Book today is Midnight in Chernobyl, the untold story of the world's greatest nuclear disaster by Adam Higginbotham. This is from the prologue. Saturday, April 26, 1986, 4:16 p.m., Chernobyl Atomic Energy Station, Ukraine. Senior Lieutenant Alexander Logachev loved radiation the way other men love their wives. Tall and good-looking, 26 years old, with close-cropped dark hair and ice blue eyes, Logachev had joined the Soviet Army when he was still a boy. They had trained him well. The instructors from the military academy outside Moscow taught him with lethal poisons and unshielded radiation. He traveled to the testing grounds of Semipalatinsk in Kazakhstan and to the desolate East Urals trace, where the fallout from a clandestine radioactive accident still poisoned the landscape. Eventually, Logachev's training took him even to the remote and forbidden islands of Novaya Zemlya, high in the Arctic Circle, and ground zero for the detonation of the terrible Tsar Bomba, the largest thermonuclear device in history. Now, as the lead radiation reconnaissance officer of the 427th Red Banner Mechanized Regiment of the Kiev District Civil Defense Force, Logachev knew how to protect himself and his three-man crew from nerve agents, biological weapons, gamma rays, and hot particles, by doing their work just as the textbooks dictated, by trusting his dosimetry equipment, and, when necessary, reaching for the nuclear, bacterial, and chemical warfare medical kits stored in the cockpit of their armored car. But he also believed that the best protection was psychological. These men who allowed themselves to fear radiation were most at risk. But those who came to love and appreciate its spectral presence, to understand its caprices, could endure even the most intense gamma bombardment and emerge as healthy as before. As he sped through the suburbs of Kiev that morning at the head of a column of more than 30 vehicles summoned to an emergency at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, Logachev had every reason to feel confident. The spring air blowing through the hatches of his armored scout car carried the smell of the trees and the freshly cut grass. His men, gathered on the parade ground just the night before for their monthly inspection, were drilled and ready. At his feet, a battery of radiological detection instruments, including a newly installed electronic device twice as sensitive as the old model, murmured softly, revealing nothing unusual in the atmosphere around them. But as they finally approached the plant later that morning, it became clear that something extraordinary had happened. The alarm on the radiation dosimeter first sounded as they passed the concrete signpost marking the perimeter of the power station grounds, and the lieutenant gave orders to stop the vehicle and log their findings. 51 roentgens per hour. If they waited here just 60 minutes, they would all absorb the maximum dose of radiation permitted Soviet troops during wartime. They drove on, following the line of high-voltage transmission towers that marched toward the horizon in the direction of the power plant. Their readings climbed still further before falling again. Then, as the armored car rumbled along the concrete bank of the station's cooling canal, the outline of the fourth unit of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant finally became visible, and Logoshev and his crew gazed at it in silence. The roof of the 20-story building had been torn open, its other upper levels blackened and collapsed into heaps of rubble. They could see shattered panels of ferroconcrete, tumbled blocks of graphite, and here and there the glittering metal casings of fuel assemblies from the core of a nuclear reactor. A cloud of steam drifted from the wreckage into the sunlit sky. Yet they had orders to conduct a full reconnaissance of the plant. Their armored car crawled counterclockwise around the complex at 10 kilometers an hour. Sergeant Vlaskin called out the radiation readings from the new instruments, and Logoshev scribbled them down on a map, hand-drawn on a sheet of parchment paper in ballpoint pen and colored marker. 1 rochin per hour, then 2, then 3. They turned left and the figures began to rise quickly. 10, 30, 50, 100. 250 rochins an hour, the sergeant shouted, his eyes widening. Comrade Lieutenant, he began, and pointed at the radiometer. Logoshev looked down at the digital readout and felt his scalp prickle with terror. 2,080 rochins an hour, an impossible number. Logoshev struggled to remain calm and remember the textbook, to conquer his fear. But his training failed him, and the lieutenant heard himself screaming in panic at the driver, petrified that the vehicle would stall. Why are you going this way, you son of a bee? Are you out of your effing mind? If this thing dies, we'll all be corpses in 15 minutes. Part 1, Chapter 1, The Soviet Prometheus. At the slow beat of approaching rotor blades, black birds rose into the sky, scattering over the frozen meadows and the pearly knots of creeks and ponds lacing the Pripyat River basin. Far below, standing knee-deep in snow, his breath lingering in heavy clouds, Viktor Brukhanov awaited the arrival of the nomenklatura from Moscow. When the helicopter touched down, the delegation of ministers and Communist Party officials trudged together over the icy field. The savage cold gnawed at their heavy woolen coats and nipped beneath their tall fur hats. The head of the Ministry of Energy and Electrification of the USSR and senior party bosses from the Soviet Socialist Republic of Ukraine joined Brukhanov at the spot where their audacious new project was to begin. Just 34 years old, clever and ambitious, a dedicated party man, Brukhanov had come to Western Ukraine with orders to begin building what would become the greatest nuclear power station on Earth. Midnight at Chernobyl. Did you know that every weekday we send out an email before the show giving you all the topics coming up so you could be fully informed and ready to interact with our program? Or that after the show we send out Sue's Stack, a list of every topic I've discussed along with clickable hot links to every source of information I've shared with you on the air? It's all completely free and available over at thom.tv, THOM.tv. Check it out. And welcome back. Reminder, 7 o'clock tonight, Powell's Books, Be There, Be Square. I'll be reading from my new book, The Hidden History of American Democracy, and signing copies, so it should be fun. We have poor Leonard Leo. Poor Leonard Leo. It's okay to discriminate against and hate on gay people, but don't dare speak to him. Jane Mayer over at the New Yorker has the scoop on a civil lawsuit that was just filed in U.S. District Court in the District of Maine. What happened was Leonard Leo, you know, the guy who's now controls over $1 billion, and the guy who basically, you know, ran the Federalist Society, stacked the federal courts, stacked the Supreme Court, got abortion banned, all this other stuff. He lives in a lavish $3.3 million waterfront estate in Northeast Harbor, Maine on Mount Desert Island. And, you know, the people who live around him are not so happy. And on July 31st, Anna Durand, a local inn owner, was on her way to a protest with her son, a 23-year-old landscaper. They spotted Leo and his family walking and yelled out the car window at him. They yelled, "You're an effing fascist." And then they got to, where they were going, and the local cops showed up and arrested them, took them off to jail, threw them in a cell, booked them, and they're suing the police. They can't sue Leo because all he did was tell the police to go arrest them. But they're suing the police for, quote, a retaliatory arrest to silence our free speech while acting at the direct behest of Leonard Leo, who the suit describes as a powerful and wealthy conservative political activist who has used millions of dollars as political speech to influence American politics and the courts. Now, isn't this ironic? I mean, in the 303 Creative versus Elenis case, the Supreme Court just ruled that it's okay to discriminate against gay people in a place of business. And that case was brought by a group that was funded in part by Leonard Leo. The Alliance Defending Freedom is the name of his group. And, so he's using local government to infringe on a protester's freedom of speech after getting a Supreme Court order saying that the freedom of people to literally be gay is not a freedom anymore. At least if you want to engage in interstate commerce. It's bizarre. All righty, let's pick up your calls and see what's on your mind in this beautiful new week. By the way, today may be the day. So far, it has not happened. I've got a monitor up on here in the studio, so I watch the various television networks, and should it happen, I'll keep you up to date. But today might be the day that Jack Smith indicts Donald Trump. Everybody thought it was going to be last Friday. In fact, several of the news media had moved some of their main anchors up to Washington, D.C., just in case, because Trump had been given 4 days, from last Sunday, which presumably expired on Thursday. But, so far, no indictment, and nothing coming out of Fani Willis down in Atlanta either, which has got to have Donald nervous, right? Because it means that they're quietly working away. All righty, Babs in Bellevue, Washington. Hey, Babs, thanks for listening to KBCS. What's on your mind today?
Well, first of all, I just wanted to, I'm the person who called you about the AFD in Germany.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, I wanted to tell you that I was in Germany for 14 months, pre-COVID and then during COVID until I felt safe to fly back home. Mm-hmm. And I just thought it was really interesting. For 14 months altogether, I was with my 95-year-old aunt who had asked me to come and help her out because she wasn't feeling well, and then I got stuck. And I just thought it was extremely interesting how the Germans, the attitude, how they covered it, and how they covered the United States. Mm-hmm. And at first, I wasn't very happy to be stuck there, but then it became such a life lesson. And I just wanted to share that with you because I was born in Germany, and I came here when I was 11, and in 1955, and I was born the day after D-Day. So I've got a real, what do you call it? A real, not affinity, but Germany is super important.
Yeah, a real connection to that country. And I'm assuming you speak pretty good German, too.
Ja, ich spreche Deutsch.
Ich kann auch.
And I'm from Stuttgart, the home of Mercedes-Benz and Porsche and good wine. Mm-hmm. Anyway, listen, I wanted to give you some insights into how Germans feel, and I think it's so interesting because my mother was in a camp at 19. She was hauled off because she wouldn't say Heil Hitler when she got to work, and she was in a work camp at the age of 19. Whoa. And she still, I know, but she couldn't, and that's what made her come to the United States. Right. Because she said, any country that can do this to me, I'm out of here. Yeah. And she dragged me along when I was 11, and I'm just so happy that I'm an American, but I can't stand what's happening right now. I have all these Republican friends that are driving me nuts. No,
I get it. I'm curious, though. You kind of teased this, Babs, that when you lived in Germany during the pandemic and the Germans reacted to it differently than the Americans did. How so?
There was not a lot of animosity toward it, like what I saw happening in the United States.
In other words, people happily wore their masks and went along with the shutdown and waited for the vaccine and then got themselves vaccinated. And I mean, Germany has one of the lower death rates in the world, I believe, from COVID.
I know. I mean, they've done some bad things in history, but they do so many good things.
Yeah.
And one of them is I really like. I think they critically think better than.
Yeah.
I think there's a real lack of critical thinking teaching in our schools.
Yeah, I agree.
And the fact that there's no, what do you always say? No, kids don't learn about the government anymore. Civics, like what the heck? How have we let this happen? It's driving me nuts.
Yeah, they aggressively teach civics in Germany. I mean, I know. Aggressively.
I know. Although you might find this interesting, because I was born right after the war, I was not taught any. I learned about Nibelungenlied and German myths. They didn't know what to teach us right after the war.
Right. Well, by the 60s, they had firmly established a Holocaust, what would you call it, curriculum. Although I got to tell you, in the 80s, we had a foreign exchange student from Germany live with us for one school year, and this was the year that Schindler's List came out, the movie, and we took him to see Schindler's List, and he sobbed through the whole movie. I mean, as did a third of the audience, but he was particularly hard hit by it. I could not stop crying all the way home in the car, and finally he later told us, he said, we studied this in school. He said, but it was nothing like that. It was not. It was like, this is history, and the movie made it real. And he said, it hit me at the beginning of the movie that my family must have been involved in this, and that I bear some responsibility for this. And he said, I just don't know what to do about it, but it's just overwhelming. That was a fascinating. I mean, it was a remarkable bit of self-insight too on his part, but. Anyhow.
Hey, you know what? I can totally relate to that because my father was in the SS.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there you go. I mean, my mentor, Gottfried Mueller, was he was in the German army during World War II. Now he got captured in Iran in the early stages of the war, and that's when he became a vegetarian and renounced war and became a peacenik. He signed up too. I guess I'm not sure that he had any choice. I mean, it was the late 1930s.
No, they didn't. I had 3 uncles that were captured in the war, and they were all like 18, 19, and 20 when they were drafted. Yeah, there you go. Babs, I got to move along, but thank you for the call, and thanks for the insights. Thing? Come to Seattle. Come to Seattle. I want a book signing here.
All right, I'll
you can stay at my house.
Oh, well, thank you. I almost did, because City Hall or Town Hall, invited me, but I was at the time still afraid of COVID. I'm a little less afraid of COVID now, so let me discuss that with Louise. Babs, thanks a lot for the call. Yeah, I appreciate it. Don in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Don, what's on your mind today?
First, right off the bat, I got to say I agree with that lady, everything, you and her comments on Germany. I lived there for about 3.5 years for the United States Air Force.
Okay.
Medic in a hospital. But the reason I called, and I'll try to say it clearly once, and I'm kind of nervous when I get on the phone like this, is that, all the humans on this wonderful little planet that we're on, and it gets smaller all the time, it seems, with our technology, but we're part of nature, just like the trees that burn down because of the fires.
Yep.
And lo and behold, something we never had to pay attention to really are climates, which you grow up with and you play as a child and you live. And now we're aware of this thing called climate change. That's just as much nature as we are, as a frog or a giraffe or a turtle. And it's packing us on our own nature. Since we come out of the cave about a million years ago, we have been survival form of life.
Yeah. Most of your older religions. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Finish your thought, and then I'll do my rant.
You're a part of that survival mode. I watch you whenever I can. I chop your show up, and I have a connection with that other offer you have there. And what I'm saying is that we have nature is reminding us. It's that survival mode. we're all a part of that, and it's fapping us on the back. It's called
Yeah.
climate change.
Yeah, there you
So
go.
you better get with it.
So let me speak to that too. If you
Thank
look
you.
at older, yeah, you're welcome. Thank you very much, Don. If you look at older religions, if you look at the Old Norse religions, if you look at the so-called pagan religions, if you look at, I mean, even to an extent, Hinduism and Buddhism, but by and large, if you look at the older religions, you find that they integrate nature into their practices and into their worldview. And my problem with the so-called revealed religions, where, a sky god, informed a person who then informed all the rest of us of what the sky god wanted, is that by and large, those revealed religions essentially deny nature or deny the role of nature, or actually deny that humans are part of nature. They tend to argue that we are separate from, different from, apart from nature, uniquely unnatural, I guess. And it's just simply not true. And your point, Don, I believe it was Don, is perfectly made. And we really need to recalibrate our religions to get back to that.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And I know there's a huge revival of paganism, particularly in the UK, but around the world. And I see it as a good thing. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Don in Pittsburgh, Kansas. Hey, Don, what's on your mind today?
Oh, hi. Well, a couple of things. I read the same article you did about the death penalty for abortion this morning.
Yeah, on Daily Kos.
Do you read Abortion Every Day by Jessica Valenti?
I do. Yeah, it's a great Substack newsletter.
Tremendous resource. The other thing I wanted to mention, I'm an environmental geographer. And, what's been going on in the southwestern U.S. where, every conceivable, way to get people to move, from the north to the south and the southwest, went on for years and years and years. And now we have 40 million people living, in the Colorado River Basin. It can't support it. It's not, the water isn't up there. Phoenix is the fastest growing urban area in the United States. And the place, is facing an unbelievable water crisis.
Right. In fact, they just, several parts of Phoenix just forbade further home development because of that. There's just no more water.
Yeah, I mean, it's time for them to come to grips. You look at Phoenix, and there's private swimming pools and golf courses with water, with artificial lakes, and I mean, it's ridiculous. Now you go to Las Vegas, and they're serious. They have an excellent water conservation program. They have their fountains, and all that water's recycled. They lose some to evaporation.
Right.
But it would appear to me that the only option Phoenix has is to build a desalination plant in cooperation with Mexico down on the Sea of Cortez. And
that would take a hell of a pipeline.
Oh, well, but it's not. It's relatively close. I mean, California, the ocean's right there, so that's at least a relatively easy option for them.
Right.
But Phoenix is in a real pickle.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that long before they do that or anything like that, they're going to have to, number one, mandate natural lawns, get rid of all the grass. Number two, require the, stop further growth. And number three, they're going to have to start recycling their water in a big way. Maybe set up a separate gray water system that people use, and although that would require replumbing, millions of homes where you have gray water for the toilets and things, and then you have, drinking water, potable water for the faucets. But it's, you'd almost have to build the city from scratch that way. But they're going to have to do something because, and now you've got what, 4 or is it 5 states that are suing each other in federal court over the water from the Colorado River, and the Supreme Court, I believe it was, or maybe it was just a federal appeals court, just told one of the Native American tribes, forgive me, I forget which one, I think it was the Lakota, that they can't take water from a river that actually is one of the borders of their land. The river literally runs right across their land. we're going to ignore the old treaties and say, no, you can't have this water. I mean, this is crazy stuff, Don.
Well, it is, and it's the thing is that it was people were induced with it. People like warm, sunny weather, of course.
Yeah.
But, the fact that there was a water problem looming is not news. I mean, people have realized this. Informed people have realized this. But real estate speculators and hustlers, what one solution that there's quite a number of people would like to do is to build a pipeline to Lake Superior and drain Lake Superior.
Right. Ask the people who live at Lake Superior what they think of that. But yeah, I get it. Actually, they would drain the entire Great Lakes because they're all connected. Don, thanks for the call. They could actually pull it out of the southern part of Lake Michigan. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. The MAGA Republicans have a plan for America. It involves something called fascism. It's a three-step plan, actually, to take over America and turn us into a fascist state. They're following the example of Vladimir Putin in Russia and Viktor Orban in Hungary. Viktor Orban, who is held up by conservatives as the example of how a country should be run. He came to Texas to give a speech to CPAC and got a standing ovation. So the three steps. Number one, take over the electoral systems and basically rig them along with massive gerrymandering. Number two, build a fascist base by mobilizing hate against minorities, gender minorities, racial minorities, religious minorities, while merging with one of the large factions of a church and the billionaires in the country. And number three, seize control of state power and turn the criminal justice system against your enemies. There's an op-ed about the whole thing over at HartmannReport.com. It's titled, Revealed, the MAGA Republicans' Three-Step Plan for Classic Fascism. Check it out. "53 minutes past the hour, picking up your calls here. Morris in Long Beach, California. Hey, Morris, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, I had a question for you, Tom. You and Noam Chomsky are a couple of the smartest guys I know, so I thought I'd check in with you on this question. When do you get your birth certificate?
What do you mean?
When you're a birth certificate that shows that you're born, when do you get a birth certificate?
Oh, well, my parents got mine when I was born, I believe. In fact, I found a copy of it the other day. Actually, it was the hospital certificate, so I'm not sure it was a legal one, but I'm assuming this is a rhetorical question, or you're going to go somewhere with this, Morris?
You better believe it. You better believe it. When do you get your Social Security number?
Well, I got mine when I was 14. I had to go down to the Social Security office and get it. But nowadays, hospitals work with parents to get them at birth, I believe.
When is your nationality determined?
At birth.
Okay. So you were talking about an op-ed where somebody said that when something is the size of a fingernail that they qualify as a human, wouldn't they be entitled to a birth certificate, a Social Security number, and a nationality?
Well, this is one of the confusing things about these so-called personhood bills, or as they've changed the name of them now. They're calling them equal protection bills. And that is, if you are going to say that little blob of tissue the size of a grain of rice, at 6 weeks, is a person deserving of legal protection, then does mom start getting benefits at that point? Can you deduct them from your taxes, your income taxes? Should we get a passport issued with a little picture of a blob in it? I mean,
is a butterfly when it's a caterpillar?
Well, yeah, I guess the better question is a butterfly when it's an egg? But because the eggs hatch into caterpillars, and then the caterpillars go through the chrysalis or cocooning stage. But
well, obviously, this obviously, Tom, this is not like 2 and 2 is 4. This is not clear-cut discussion, right? People just getting kind of arbitrary with it. And two things I'll say real quickly before I let you go. There's a thing called aeroponics, not hydroponics, aeroponics. Aeroponics is when you grow fruits and vegetables only using 10% of the amount of water that traditionally is used. And lastly, I'll leave you with this. Just because people do not support that war in Ukraine does not make us Putin supporters. Some of us just don't believe in sadistic behavior.
Okay.
All right. Thank you very much.
I got it, Morris. Thanks for the call. Jessica in Chicago. Hey, Jessica, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Tom,
Hey.
I wanted to say, hey, that caller said drain our lakes, and I say just move somewhere wiser, not
Right.
live in the desert.
Right. Well, what's going to happen is, you know, this is the so-called free market at work. What's going to happen is the price of water is going to start going up in Phoenix and other places that are running out of water. And as the price of water goes up, it's going to get more and more expensive to live there. And eventually what you're going to see is the same kind of thing that you saw in Detroit when the auto companies moved all their production to Mexico. And suddenly, you know, all the good jobs were gone. I mean, Detroit has lost half their housing. I don't know if it's half, but a large chunk of their housing. And, you know, they've spent the last 15, 20 years literally tearing down houses and creating public spaces. And I'm guessing that that's the future of Phoenix.
Oh, and Tom, one thing that really upsets me, the Texas heat has killed prisoners and cost the state millions in death and civil lawsuits.
Yep.
And so instead of fixing the problem, there was a lawsuit that they tried to stop the air conditioning, and they spent $7 million, when to air condition it would have only been $4 million.
Wow.
And
You're talking for the jail?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this heat is killing prisoners, and I called the White House, and I just said, something has to be done. We're just going to kill off so many people. This is awful.
Yeah, I get it. I'm with you. Jessica, thank you for the call. Up next, DeSantis has a weird new video, and Alabama and Florida. Got to tell you about this.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free, and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We take life back.
Today we're reading from David Enrich's book, Dark Towers, Deutsche Bank, Donald Trump, and an Epic Trail of Destruction. This is from Chapter 10. It's titled The Mar-a-Lago Prize. In 1905, a German immigrant living in the Bronx set up a small barber shop on the ground floor of a newly constructed building at 60 Wall Street, in the heart of Manhattan's booming financial district. In an era before skyscrapers, the 25-story L-shaped tower was a landmark, its gargoyle-guarded roof visible from the nearby waterfront. The barbershop thrived, offering shaves and trims to a procession of bankers, stock exchange traders, lawyers, and office workers. The barber's name was Frederick Trump. The same year that he opened the shop, his wife gave birth to a boy named Fred. Many years passed, and the barbershop closed, and the old 60 Wall Street gave way in 1989 to a new 60 Wall Street, a 47-story tower topped with a distinctive pyramid roof. For a time, it was home to J.P. Morgan and Company. Then the bank left, and in 2005, Deutsche Bank started relocating its American staff, displaced ever since 9/11, to its new home at 60 Wall Street. And so Frederick Trump's grandson, born to Fred's wife in 1946, became an occasional visitor to the site of his grandfather's old barber shop. Deutsche's relationship with Donald Trump had only deepened since Mike Offit left. Justice Justin Kennedy, this is the son of Justice Anthony Kennedy, Justin Kennedy, now a managing director, had become a key point contact for Trump and helped chaperone large real estate deals for him through the bank. Kennedy's role was to find customers to buy portions of loans after Deutsche dispensed the money, a process that allowed Deutsche Bank to make larger loans than it otherwise could have. Kennedy sometimes sat with Trump in his luxury box at the U.S. Open tennis tournament or at Manhattan nightclubs, where Trump would park himself at a table in the corner facing outward, holding court like a mafia don. Now, with Kennedy's encouragement, Deutsche hurried along a Henry Villard-like path. In 2000, the bank had plunked down another $150 million to be used for the renovations of Trump's building at 40 Wall Street. The next year, Deutsche agreed to extend Trump a mortgage worth more than $900 million, at the time the largest ever on a single property, so he could buy the General Motors building on the southeastern corner of New York's Central Park. Trump already owned half of the 50-story building. He wanted the rest. In 2002, Deutsche agreed to refinance about $70 million that he owed on some of his Atlantic City casinos. Those loans came out of Deutsche's commercial real estate division, which Kennedy was helping to run. Not everyone was enamored with Trump. Seth Waugh, W-A-U-G-H, one of Edson's many Merrill Lynch recruits and the head of Deutsche's American operations, learned around 2001 that the bank was planning to lend Trump about $500 million to use as he wished, basically an unrestricted cash infusion to stabilize the developer's flagging finances. Waugh had previously witnessed up close the carnage that Trump could inflict on imprudent financial institutions. At Merrill, Edison had assigned him the task of mopping up after Trump defaulted on nearly $700 million of bonds that Merrill had helped sell for his Taj Mahal casino in Atlantic City. Waugh was in no hurry to repeat the experience at Deutsche. He voiced strong objections to the proposed new loan to Trump, in which Trump would not have had to put up any hard assets as collateral, and the deal soon died. Yet Deutsche's broader Trump relationship rumbled on. In 2003, another arm of Deutsche, focused on helping companies raise money by selling stocks and bonds to investors, agreed to work with Trump. The point man on this part of the relationship was Richard Byrne, another Merrill veteran who had been involved in the Taj Mahal debacle. Byrne had helped sell the ill-fated Taj bonds to investors. Now Trump hired Byrne's group at Deutsche to issue bonds for his troubled Trump hotel and casino resorts. Byrne knew this would be an uphill battle. Not only had Trump defaulted in the past, but he also had recently been taunting investors that he might stop paying back other outstanding bonds. Waugh didn't warn Byrne about the recently rejected $500 million loan, and so Byrne organized a roadshow for Trump to meet with and try to win over big institutional investors. He escorted Trump to meetings all over New York and Boston. At every stop, boardrooms and auditoriums were jammed with traders, fund managers, senior executives, and secretaries curious to see the Donald show, and Trump didn't disappoint. He rocked, he rolled, and he delivered wildly optimistic and inconsistent financial projections. Afterward, Trump called Byrne to ask how much money they'd raised. The answer, alas, was virtually zero. Byrne braced for an explosion as he explained to Trump that though he'd been treated like a celebrity, nobody trusted him with their money. Trump took the rejection in stride. "Let me talk to your salespeople," he requested. Byrne agreed, and Trump came to deliver a pep talk. "Fellas, I know this isn't the easiest thing you've all had to sell," he acknowledged, "but if you get this done, you'll all be my guests at Mar-a-Lago." Trump was always good at pushing an audience's buttons. A weekend with Trump at Mar-a-Lago, bragging rights that not even money could buy, and this new incentive did the trick. The salesman worked the phones, cast a wider net for more clients, and managed to sell an impressive $485 million of junk bonds, albeit at a high interest rate that reflected investors' fears that Trump might default. The book Dark Towers by David Enrich.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome to the second hour of our program. So over on the Republican side, there's this little mini industry of people creating bizarre, often hateful, and sometimes even Nazi imagery filmed videos. There's one running behind me right now. This was not produced by the DeSantis campaign. But it has not been, spoken against by the DeSantis campaign, and it's like it's got the Nazi sun wheel at the very end of it. I mean, it's truly bizarre stuff, and it's actually the person who first posted it deleted it, but then it got reposted. This is from an account called Ron DeSantis Fan Cams, and then the host Luke Thompson of Constitutionally Speaking spotted it. And the DeSantis campaign is like, well, you shouldn't hold us responsible for it. Well, why don't they denounce it then? Why don't they come out and say, no? I mean, can you imagine if somebody, let's say, I or you and I made a video for the Biden campaign that had a whole bunch of people doing a Sig Heil or had Nazi iconography in it. It would take about 30 seconds for the Biden campaign or somebody speaking on their behalf to say, we had nothing to do with that. We're not going there. But Republicans can't repudiate this kind of stuff because it's who they are. They have made literally a deal with the devil. They have the deal that they made is, they are totally sold out to the billionaires and the corporate monopolies, and corporations can't vote, and there's not enough CEOs out there and enough billionaires to elect anybody, right? America has a little over 1,000 billionaires or something in the neighborhood of 1,000 billionaires, and probably fewer than 10,000 major CEOs. And that's not enough to elect a dog catcher. So the Republican Party had to make some choices, and they made the big choice back in 1968 in the Nixon campaign with a Southern strategy to reach out to the former Dixiecrats who were left behind by the Republicans, or by the Democrats, excuse me, in 64 when they signed the Civil Rights Act, and 65 the Voting Rights Act. And they reached out and said, okay, we're going to pick up the white racists. This is who, and Nazis, we'll take the Nazis, sure, no problem. Which is so ironic because, Dwight Eisenhower, the first Republican president of my lifetime, he was elected in 1952, fought the Nazis. I mean, he was the guy who led the invasion of Europe. He was the supreme commander of all the Allied forces in Europe. But now the Republican Party have left Dwight Eisenhower in the dust. They are now, kind of officially the party of the Nazis. It's pretty amazing when you think about it. Meanwhile, speaking of the GOP, down in Florida, the Florida Democrats are scrambling because, over the last decade or so, in Florida, Democrats had been encouraging Democratic voters to sign up for vote by mail. And the reason why is pretty straightforward. A, it's more convenient. I mean, you get your ballot in the mail and you can look up ballot measures and judges and things online and figure out who you're going to vote for. You don't have to do your homework and make crib notes, before you go to the polling station. B, you don't have to take time off work. C, it's just super convenient. But here's the problem. And as a result of this, there's lots and lots, there's actually more registered Democrats who have asked to vote by mail in Florida than there are registered Republicans. And DeSantis and the Republicans figured this out last year. And so they passed a law which took effect this year that said that the state has to purge all of the vote by mail voters. Now, they're going to knock off a bunch of Republicans, too. It used to be it was mostly Republicans who were vote by mail because they were mostly elderly, retired people in Florida. Well, there's still a lot of those folks. But it's overwhelmingly now Democrats who are vote by mail. So now every single vote by mail voter has been pulled. I mean, they still have their voter registration, but they no longer are going to automatically get a ballot in the mail. And most of them are expecting that ballot because the ballots have been coming every year. They've just been on the permanent send me a ballot list. And so this year when the ballot doesn't come, you know, probably enough time will pass that it's too late to even vote, and they'll just wonder, oh, it must have just been me, or maybe I missed it in the mail, or maybe something happened. But no Democrat in Florida is going to get a ballot in the mail this year, unless they go through the hoops, unless they show up at the office, you know, the state office where you register to vote, and ask specifically for a vote by mail form, and they fill out that form, and they show their ID, and they, you know, re-sign the card, and it's a whole song and dance you got to do. And so the Democrats in Florida are just scrambling. I mean, this is voter suppression. This is Miami-Dade County, for example, had 438,000 mail ballot requests at the end of last year. All 438,000 of those people are now out of luck. Hillsborough County, 320,000 voters on the list at the end of last year. Broward County, 428,000 people on the ballot on the list at the end of the last year. I mean, you know, this let's see, who is Walker? Ashley Walker, a Democratic strategist. She said the rule was designed in a way to eliminate any kind of advantage the Democrats may have gained. And you combine that with, you know, the collapse in the black vote in Florida last year in the 2022 election, because, you know, 6 months before the election, or a few months before the election, Ron DeSantis had a bunch of black people arrested for voting while felons, even though, you know, there was a ballot initiative that legalized that. They put a bunch of gotchas into the law, and here we are. Meanwhile, in other voting news, down in Alabama, you know, the Supreme Court said you have, I believe it's 8 congressional districts, or is it 7? It's either 7 or 8. And 27%, let me get the exact number right here. Yeah, 27% of the voters in the state of Alabama are black. So that's a little over a fourth, almost a fifth of all the voters in Alabama are black. But out of 8 congressional districts, they only have 1. They used to have 2. But then the Republicans redrew the map. So this went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said, you got to have 2. You got to have 2 black districts to represent black people in Alabama. So the legislature went back to the drawing board, and they created 2 new districts. One is only 55.6% black, which means that if you suppress the black voter turnout by, you know, arresting some more black people, well, I guess they've already done it, odds are that district will become Republican. And then the second one is 50.65. So it's technically majority black, but not really. Alabama may well end up with no black representation whatsoever in the United States House of Representatives, and no Democrats under this map. So now comes the question, you know, is the appeals court going to go along with this? Is the Supreme Court going to go along with it? I don't know. It's going to be interesting to keep an eye on this thing and see how it plays out. Meanwhile, I've got a geeky science for you. The science of how highly dominant men become endorsed as leaders during one particular moment of history, you know, from generation to generation. There's this one particular factor or variable that will cause people to say, yes, we want a strong man. I'll tell you about that right after the break.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
They're saying now that as much as half of Trump's fundraising is going to pay for his legal bills. I'm still wondering what happened to the $600 million he and his family appropriated from, you know, 2020. And welcome back. Arnold in Roxborough, North Carolina. Hey, Arnold, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how you doing? It's Arnold, that ungrateful descendant of the slaves.
Okay, go
calling
for
you
it.
to talk about this talk about this guy down there in Florida. Well, the school system as well as the governor down there want to just change it back around to take things and spin it around so it don't look like black people had any kind of problems coming through slavery. So they will make it. They don't. It's not an issue with me per se, but I'm just saying what they're going to try to say is it shouldn't be an issue with nobody because they didn't do anything to the slaves, but gave them work and fed them,
taught them skills,
treated them right.
Yeah.
It's just insane how the Republicans do it. The way you were just talking a few minutes ago, how they chase these people, these right-wing people around. Like, you remember back during the Tea Party? The Republicans fell all over the Tea Party and just hugged up on them. And because they came out in unified force and they voted strictly Republican.
Right.
Same thing they're doing now with these mega people, Republicans.
Right.
I mean, anybody that would listen to the Republicans, they'll put up anything they say do. And it's just how they do it in this country.
Yeah.
They don't care about nobody's human rights or
no, they just want money and power.
Individual rights and stuff like that. They want money and power, and they can just run over top of you. Yeah. Like you said, it was left up to the rich people. They couldn't elect the dog catcher. They couldn't elect a post office manager.
Yep.
It's just like that because there's not a number of them.
Yep.
But people don't forget to know that when you're there voting, you got to get out and you got to push. If you want your party to win, you want your man to win, you got to get out there and push and tell people. You got to vote. You can't sit back and watch this go by.
Yeah.
You can't let this get away like that because I tell you, down here in North Carolina, where I live at, man, I get so every time. And I just be telling people, let's go. I meet them anywhere I see them on the streets, Walmart, any place. And I say, you got to get up and vote. And I don't be telling them who to vote for. I be telling them what to vote for. Yeah. The rights that these other people will deny you from.
Here's the problem in Florida, though, Arnold. 1 in 5 African Americans in Florida, adults, has a felony conviction. And the reason for this, the reason that they are so aggressive, I mean, they arrest black people in Florida 3-to-1 for jaywalking, for example, and then very often amp that up to a felony so that they can, and it's not even necessarily just to feed the for-profit prisons, it's to get them off the voting rolls. And now, they had that ballot initiative that said, okay, you can get back on the voting rolls. And then the legislature passed a law saying if you've got even a parking ticket you haven't paid and you vote and as an ex-felon, you go to prison for a couple of years. And so now you've got a fifth of the black people in Florida scared to death to vote with good reason.
Right. Exactly. I don't know if you saw the news, recent news, the United States news over here recently, a truck driver going across Ohio, like on I-70 there, and the police pulled him over, and they sicked the dogs on him. The guy had pulled him over. He got out of the truck. First, he didn't stop the truck when they first got behind him, and when he finally stopped the truck and got out, he had his hands in there, surrender. The guy sicked the dogs on him.
I know, and he was stopped for having a missing mud flap. A missing mud flap. Are you kidding me? I mean, this is like, he was actually stopped for driving while black in Ohio. Ohio has become just a hardcore red state. Arnold, I got to run, but thanks for the call. That's a great one. It's 19 minutes past the hour. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. Recently, I did an op-ed rant here about what happens when you raise the top income tax rate on morbidly rich people to 90%, and how, that helps reduce income inequality and funds the government, all kinds of good, positive things. What about corporate taxes? We really need to go back to the 50% top corporate income tax rate that we had under Dwight Eisenhower, for example. The reason why is not on the assumption that we're going to collect all that money, but what it does is it causes corporations to change their behavior, to do things to try to get tax deductions so they don't have to pay that in taxes. And what are the main things they do? They develop new products. They do research and development. They become more competitive. They open up new stores. They pay their employees better. They offer better benefits. all of these things are 100% tax deductible and thus lower their corporate income taxes and help out America. You can read all about it over at hartmanreport.com. 21 minutes past the hour. So how is it that countries get about basically putting strong men in charge? Why does that happen? A new study was just published in the peer-reviewed journal Adaptive Human Behavior and Physiology. And they did this study, this fascinating psychological study with a group of people. It was 1,026 participants. And this was at the University of Illinois at Champaign, at Urbana-Champaign. And essentially what they did was they created 3 different levels of threat that these people faced. Now, it wasn't like an actual physical threat. It was kind of in a game circumstance, but still, they had the experience of threat. And they were at 3 different levels of intensity. One was no threat, and then there was a 4th that was no threat at all. And what they found was that as the level of threat increased, the people playing the game, there was always a leader in each one of these games, the people playing the game increasingly turned to the most aggressive, most dominant figure to be the leader. They say the results show that participants perceived that player as more dominant in situations when he delivered harsher punishments, but delivering a punishment was part of the game. As the punishments increased, so did the average rating of the punisher's perceived dominance. This pattern held across all 10 threat level groups. In these conditions, the third player was also seen as having the highest prestige. Now, to translate, and then conversely, the weakest leader support is obtained during a time of low threat and high candidate dominance. So what this tells us is that the more Donald Trump or other Republicans can convince us that America is under siege, that we're being invaded from Mexico, that there's a wave of crime, that people in the cities, particularly black people, because this is Republicans talking, are going nuts and they're killing people and crime is out of control. And the more that they can convince you of that, the more likely you are to say, okay, I'll take an authoritarian for president. Thank you very much. Give me Donald Trump. Give me Chris Christie. And when you think back to, the times when countries did flip fascist, they were very often during times of significant crisis, of threat. Now, the crisis was sometimes war, but also sometimes economic. So it's a great lesson here about human nature, number one. But number two, a huge cautionary tale about our politics. So just wanted to share that with you. All righty, let's pick up your calls here. George in Chicago. Hey, George, what's on your mind today?
Well, Tom, I was wondering if you or anybody in the listening audience has noticed that lately there's been a lot of TV commercials from an organization called the FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, as they describe themselves.
I haven't seen any, but I don't watch that much television, so maybe not.
Well, it's apparently been in existence since around 1998 or 99, and was founded with a slightly different name. I think it was Foundation for Individual Rights and Education. And primarily, over its history, it's been an advocate for right-wingers and conservatives on campus. But from what research I've been able to do on it, some of their funding is from prominent conservative organizations like the Koch Foundation and the Bradley Foundation. Although there appear to be a number of former ACLU figures like Nadine Strauss and in their like the board of directors.
So what are they advertising, George? What are they? What is the gist of the point that they're
the
making?
most recent commercial is it shows an African American woman who was present at I guess it was a counter demonstration situation where there were a bunch of right-winger Proud Boy types and a number of what I would characterize as more normal, freedom-loving Americans. And one of the big, bulky right-wingers got out of his group and was in the middle of the counter-demonstrators, and a number of them, unfortunately, started beating on him, which is inexcusable. And this African-American woman protected him with her body. And so she is speaking in the commercial, and then they tell you it's from FIRE, the fire.
Right.
So I was just wondering if that's something that could be addressed. And very quickly, you can't take any water out of the Great Lakes anywhere else because we've had a treaty with Canada since 1913 called the Great Lakes Compact that forbids any water from being directed out of the Great Lakes Basin, period, full stop.
Interesting. I didn't know that, George, and I used to live there. I used to live in Michigan. Thank you for that. George, I got to run, but thank you for the call.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Good old Canada. The Mounties have ridden to save the day. We'll be back with your calls right after this.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Vince Houghton's Nuking the Moon and Other Intelligence Schemes and Military Plots Left on the Drawing Board. This is Chapter 7, Operation Northwoods. On April 17, 1961, more than 1,400 Cuban exiles forming the Brigada de Asalto 2506 landed on the beaches of Cuba at Playa Girón in the Bahia de Cojinos, the Bay of Pigs. Their mission was to overthrow the regime of Fidel Castro, Cuba's increasingly communist leader, who had himself overthrown the regime of American ally Batista just 2 years before. A communist leader just 90 miles from Key West was a rather painful thorn in the side of the newly inaugurated President John F. Kennedy, and his ouster was considered a high national security priority, as it had been for Kennedy's predecessor, Dwight Eisenhower. The invasion was backed by the U.S. government and the CIA. We can argue why the Bay of Pigs invasion failed until we're blue in the face, and many people still do. For many in the Cuban exile community, the mission failed because JFK refused to give American naval and air support, elements called in for the original plan developed by the Eisenhower administration. Maybe this is true. The problem here is that we begin to descend into the realm of the counterfactuals, the if-onlys and what-ifs, things that we are doing our damnedest to avoid. Look, I've met a lot of the Cubans who took part in that invasion, many of whom are permanently settled in or around Miami, my hometown. They are impressive men, and I wouldn't put anything past them. If they say they could have kicked out Castro with U.S. naval and air support, who am I to argue? But I still will, because things are much more complicated from an intelligence perspective. Despite the lack of air and naval support, and despite the intensity and desire of the Cuban exile forces, it would have been immeasurably difficult to overcome one of the most problematic aspects of the entire invasion. Castro not only knew they were coming, he knew when and where they were coming. A combination of piss-poor information security, or in today's parlance, InfoSec, with the ability of Cuban intelligence to infiltrate the Miami exile community meant that the secret mission to free Cuba of Castro was anything but secret. It's not like this was a huge surprise for the CIA or the U.S. military. The Cuban intelligence service was very good, and some in the exile community had loose lips. In this environment, it was nearly impossible to conduct effective counterintelligence and keep the invasion secret. Most telling of all, the Soviets had literally broadcast their knowledge of the mission 4 days before it happened. On April 13th, Radio Moscow released an English-language newscast in which they predicted an invasion of Cuba by CIA-trained exiles within the week. It seems they were trying to warn us against carrying out the invasion, a type of deterrence through propaganda. Hey, we know you're coming, so perhaps now is not a good time for your secret operation. Clearly, that didn't work. The blowback from the failed mission was significant on multiple levels. More than 100 members of the 2506 Brigade were killed in combat, along with 4 American volunteer pilots from the Alabama Air National Guard, who were contracted by the CIA. Hundreds more in Cuba would be executed in the days and weeks following the invasion, as Castro eliminated anyone suspected of abetting the exiles. More than 1,200 of the brigade would be captured by the Cuban government, and some of those members were subsequently executed. The Kennedy administration was embarrassed by the failed mission. The U.S. government looked inept and failing to maintain order even in its own backyard. In the zero-sum game of the Cold War, where victory for one of the superpowers was defeat for the other, this was a huge win for the Soviets. Not to mention that the invasion pushed Castro even more firmly into the Soviet sphere of influence. And as far as the strength of the regime was concerned, the Bay of Pigs invasion did the exact opposite of what was intended. It made Castro's regime more powerful than ever before. The operation was a great political victory for the Cubans at home and abroad. Castro was a hero in the eyes of his people for defeating the Yankee invasion and was able to consolidate his power. The fiasco also elevated the Cuban government to a newfound global status, transforming communist Cuba from a aggrieved little country to an equal in the eyes of the world. In fact, Argentinian physician turned Cuban revolutionary Ernesto Che Guevara actually thanked the United States for the failed invasion. The CIA bore the brunt of the blame for the failed mission. President Kennedy fired CIA Director Allen Dulles, along with Deputy Director Charles Cabell and Deputy Director for Plans Richard M. Bissell, the 3 men who made up the core of the agency's leadership, particularly in the realm of covert action. Kennedy also removed, at least temporarily, major paramilitary operations from the purview of the CIA. For more than a decade, CIA had been the agency with primary responsibility for paramilitary covert operations, but now it was benched. Into the void leapt the U.S. military. In June 1961, about 2 months after the Bay of Pigs, President Kennedy approved National Security Action Memoranda 55, 56, and 57, which codified the shift in paramilitary responsibility from the CIA to the Pentagon. Nothing else really changed. The U.S. government was still looking for ways to oust Castro from power, just through a different government agency. By autumn, Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations, Brigadier General Edward Lansdale, a legendary intelligence officer, or infamous, or both, depending on your perspective, was asked to brainstorm ideas to get rid of Fidel. He didn't disappoint. In February 1962, Lansdale provided a document titled Possible Actions to Provoke, Harass, or Disrupt Cuba. Some of the actions are pretty good, some are quite silly, and some are downright abhorrent. The book is Nuking the Moon by Vince Houghton.
Hey, if you like the rants that I open the show with every day, they're typically published over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. So when was the last time you heard some Republican ranting about how, you know, like Ron DeSantis, Florida's where woke goes to die, and we're declaring war on woke, and all that kind of. You know, Republicans have been using dog whistles for most of my lifetime to shout out to their generally white racist base against various minority groups. You know, Richard Nixon was, we're law and order, and you know, as John Ehrlichman pointed out, his whole war on drugs was basically a war on black people and hippies. George Herbert Walker Bush had Willie Horton. George W. Bush had the Muslims. Donald Trump, it's the Mexican rapists. It just never ends. Woke is just the latest dog whistle they've got. So the next time somebody uses that phrase, just, you know, ask them, you know, what are you talking about here? Are you just trying to tell me that you're a bigot? I mean, what are you really saying? There's a whole rant about this over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. And welcome back. 35 minutes past the hour, picking up your calls, I think. Hang on just a minute. Was there one more story here I needed to get to? No, I covered all 3 of them. Cool. All right. Joe in Parker, Colorado. Hey, Joe, what's on your mind today?
Hi. Well, I wanted to talk to you about the pricing water.
Yeah.
Colorado's doing it right. My wife of 47 years and I moved here to be near our grandkids, and we're paying $95 a month before we ever use a drop of water.
Wow.
Now, when I lived in San Bernardino County in California, $95 pretty much covered all my water use.
So basically, you're paying $95 a month just to have a pipe come into your house.
Exactly.
Wow.
My water usage last month was $13, but my bill was $108.
Right, right.
California's got to get their act together. I almost said something inappropriate there, but
yeah, I get
they've got to get it together because, you know, the homeowners associations out there, they're like little fiefdoms. And when they say, I want everyone to have a lawn,
right, you're
kind of stuck.
Yeah, and it's crazy. I mean, in a place where, you know, I could see, you know, having a lawn, you know, here in Portland, we've got two rivers, you know, that bisect the, or the, you know, the one is the northern border of the city and the other goes right through the middle of the city. So we have really abundant water. Although our water bill is still absurd. I mean, I pay over $100 a month for water, and we don't use very much water. But I still think that, you know, we should all be careful about our use of water. I mean, regardless, but particularly, you know, Colorado, particularly anybody who's getting their water off the Colorado River or in those aquifers. It's dangerous stuff, Joe.
Yeah, no, we're on well water here, but, you know, we've gotten a lot of rain this year, and I've got 5 acres, and I'm really tired of mowing this thing.
Yeah.
But, you know, thank God for the water.
I get it. I get it. Joe, thanks for the call. Dave in Inverness, Florida. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Well, I just had to call and tell you that during the last election, I was called. I'm a registered Democrat, by the way, and I registered as a Democrat to vote for Bernie, okay? So now I want you to know where I'm coming from. Anyways, I got 14 calls, 10 calls, 12 calls and women's voices, and they urged me to vote by mail. And 2 of them, they called back and said, because they sent me applications to vote by mail, and I threw them away. So there was 12 of them, and then the last 2 calls were from Don Jr. himself. Now, he didn't use my name. The other people used my name. So they were really working hard to get me to vote by mail. So what did they do? They dismantled mail sorting equipment, right? So that'd be late. And they could say, look, it's too late to count. So they dismantled that, right? And Donald Trump says the mail-in voting was corrupt. It was a finesse. It was I didn't do it that way. No, I'm not that stupid. I went down and voted in person. Where I was I can't describe this. You know, I had to show my driver's license and my voter registration card, which I did because I've been down here for 25 years. Mm-hmm. The guy gave me a dirty look and started looking at, get me scrutinizing me. And I felt like reaching across the table and choking him, but that's beside the point.
Is this because you're registered as a Democrat?
Yes.
Wow. And the calls you were getting were from Republicans?
Absolutely.
Wow.
So there's a finesse. They attempted it.
Oh, and this is in Florida.
You talk about another dirty trick.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Well, there is an effort by Democrats in Florida to get people to re-register for mail-in ballots who had previously registered with mail-in ballots because, you know, the people don't realize that their ballot is never going to appear this year because of this new law.
Oh, yeah. I know.
But
it's just easier. I don't live very far from the vote. I probably live a mile and a half from the voting booth, so I went in and voted for it.
I mean, you know.
So anyways, Tom, the other thing is I heard these people calling my next door neighbor. I'm living in this. I call him DeSantis. Okay, I gave him that moniker, DeSantis. But my neighbor's a rabid Trumper here. You know, he's always threatening to kill Democrats. I'm serious. I said, just remember one thing. His name is John. I said, just remember, John, I shoot back.
Yeah, there you go.
I'm an ex-military fighter pilot. Don't mess with me.
Yeah, more and more Democrats are starting to take that attitude. I think, sadly, I mean, it's terrible that America has come to this. That these right-wing billionaires have just been funding all these hateful movements in order to disrupt America because they don't want to pay their damn income taxes, and
exactly.
It's a crime. Dave, thanks for the call. Thanks for the information. Sean in Santa Rosa, California. Hey, Sean, what's on your mind today?
Okay. Well, it still seems a little bit sketchy, but I understand what you've expressed, so I appreciate the help.
Yeah, and
Sean, you are on the air. Sean is not on the air. Okay, Walter in Northridge, California. Hey, Walter, what's on your mind today?
Well, I kind of enjoyed and thank you and the staff and all of your folks for everything. You're wonderful.
Thank you.
I kind of was moved by Maverick's comment and completely agree with it. And I do think that while it would take apparently the size of the United States completely planted in trees and the time it takes to grow them to counterbalance the pollution, a similar amount of kelp planted in the ocean would do that. And planting kelp is something that you can also grow oysters in and so forth.
Right.
And it seems to me that since for some of these, there was a conversation I think you had the other day about getting everybody involved, the We the People, and that part of the Constitution that talks about everybody working together. You had a person yesterday. Well, Mr. Biden could begin to reassume a moral place in the world by encouraging that sort of thing. For instance, the growing of kelp, the growing of trees, and then having some. And you always mention there aren't enough very rich left-wing progressive men and women. I hope to become one of them and become a very big contributor, but that's a hope, not likely an end result. But there could be people like Mr. Soros who would fund all over the world the growing of kelp and the growing of oysters, and in the United States as well. I think that sort of thing, and there are other things.
The problem with these, Walter, I agree with you. These are all, great ideas, and we should be growing carbon sinks, and we should be, although the growing of kelp, keep in mind, you're disrupting ecosystems. There are things underneath that kelp that rely on the sunlight that would have gotten there otherwise. Although the oceans are doing this anyway. I mean, large chunks of the ocean that were blue just 20 years ago are now green, because there's so much algae growing and other plant matter growing because of the additional carbon dioxide in the water. But really what we have to do is stop putting the carbon dioxide into the air. All of these efforts, the reason Republicans will embrace these efforts is because they have nothing to do with cutting the profits of the fossil fuel industry.
I completely agree with that observation, but as the political landscape goes, acquiring respectability in the ears of people who might not be committed fascist pigs is an important part of the game for those of us who are trying to elect more progressive people. And it may encourage Mr. Biden, who has some good middle ground skills. He's not as progressive as I believe anybody would wish, probably including Mr. Biden. But he is certainly progressive, and he might have ways with those ideas to begin to make modest changes, because in addition to reducing, putting in carbon, being able to have the species, or at least the countries that are communicable with, to begin to see that individual behavior can count, as is true with the vegetarian movement and so forth, may be an enormous benefit, certainly to people who believe in truth, and that would be the progressives.
Yeah, I'm with you. Walter, thank you. Well said, excellent points all. Glenn in Kalama, Washington. Hey, Glenn, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I'm looking forward to coming in Powell's Books tonight.
Oh, great.
And pick up a book. Hey, I was wondering if you would give us, I was wondering if my thinking is viable or just thinking. Donald Trump has collected millions and millions of dollars, and I'm not real sure, but I'm pretty sure that it's all deposited in foreign banks. And it's his plan. Now, this plan is working fine to win the election. Now, if he does that, he'll be off scot-free. He'll stop all the investigation. Plan B, if he loses, between the time he loses and the time that he's about to be imprisoned, he'll take off and he'll leave for Abu Dhabi, and he'll live 15, 20 years in that city.
Right, just like
and he'll have enough money. Yeah, and he'll have enough money to live there in fine style. Now, his businesses in the United States will all be dissolved while he's gone, for sure. That leaves his kids out in the lurch, but I think that's plan A. And if not Plan A, Plan B. Do you think
I think you're absolutely right. And each one of his kids already has millions and millions of dollars in the bank. Jared and his wife, Ivanka, have hundreds of millions of dollars in the bank. They made hundreds of millions of dollars just in the 4 years that they were working in the White House. So, you know, his kids will be fine. And I share your opinion. I think that there's a very good chance if Donald Trump, if it turns out that he thinks that there's a good chance that he's going to lose or he's going to end up in jail, and particularly if the Republican Party does not make him their nominee this year, that he may well hop on a plane and end up in Saudi Arabia. And we do not have an extradition treaty, to my knowledge, with them, or Abu Dhabi, or, you know, any of those countries. You know, they're building a huge new Trump hotel complex there right now. Yeah. So that he'll just occupy the top floor. I got to run, Glenn, but thanks for the call. Excellent point. It's 46 minutes past the hour. Stay with us.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archive.
Right back with more of your calls here on the place where despair is not an option. We'll be right back with you. And welcome back. Graham in Chicago watching us on Facebook Live. Hey, Graham, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how are you? Love the show.
Thank you.
Just a kind of radical, perhaps sounding comment, but not meant to be. I am disturbed by the fact that the Florida rewriting of Black American slavery history contains the lines that the Constitution and the whole founding of America was based on Christian principles of equality and liberty, when in fact those qualities are qualities of the Enlightenment. You know, if one takes any more than a cursory look at the Bible, and most specifically the New Testament, the New Testament is silent on the question of liberty. Timothy point out that slaves should be loyal to their owners. It doesn't say anything about Roman occupation being a bad thing. It says render unto Caesar that which is Caesar. I thought that's not in Timothy. And it has very little to say about equality. In fact, I would argue, and I believe in God. I used to go to church a lot. The only beef I have is not with Christianity, it's with established religion. But the basis of Christianity is, as it developed very, very quickly, even within the time span of the Gospels, what started out as a really very socialist share all your wealth, look after the widow and the orphan, which was taken from the Old Testament, totally, religion, by the time that the Gospel of John becomes the only way to salvation is through Jesus Christ, and therefore through what became Christianity, which is hardly equality.
Yeah. No, and this, if I can, this idea that America was founded on Christianity, George Washington negotiated the Treaty of Tripoli, the Barbary treaties they're referred to. I mean, it didn't get ratified by Congress until 1796, and at that point, well, actually in January 3rd, 1797, at that point, John Adams was president. And so, you know, he ended up signing it, when it came back to him. But it was negotiated by George Washington. And Article 11 of the Treaty of Tripoli reads, and I quote, "As the government of the United States of America is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion, as it has in itself no character of enmity against the laws, religion, or tranquility of Muslims, and as the said states never have interfered or entered into any war or act of hostility against any Mohammedan nation, it is declared by the parties that no pretext arising from religious opinions shall ever produce an interruption of the harmony existing between the two countries."
Thank you, Tom. I must admit I had never heard that, but as always, I am much obliged to you.
Yeah, it's called the Treaty of Tripoli. And it's not a secret. You can easily track it down. But this is what the founders thought, right? I mean, this is literally George Washington and John Adams, and it was ratified by the Congress of the United States on June 7th, 1797. Excuse me, on June 10th. Ratified by the United States on June 10th, 1797, by a majority, a two-thirds majority of the United States Senate. So there you go. Thanks a lot for the call. Help support progressive radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, or one of our many nonprofit stations, please support them when they do their fundraising drives. Thanks for supporting Progressive Talk Radio, and tag you're it. You know, between 40 years of Ronald Reagan's neoliberalism destroying the American middle class and all the just horrors of January 6th and the Trump presidency, America's waking up, and that's a really good thing. There's actually, you know, some books coming out about this. Mine, The Hidden History of Democracy. Neil Howe's The Fourth Turning is here. And it looks like a moment of American renaissance is upon us, if our media doesn't screw it up, which raises the question, can we have democracy and Fox News? Can the two coexist? Like, you know, when Fox News runs chyrons saying that essentially Joe Biden is a wannabe dictator who's throwing Trump in jail because he's his political opponent. There's a whole rant about this and an in-depth analysis of what can we do with regard to repairing our media here in the United States over at HartmannReport.com. I think you'll find it interesting. Check it out. 52 minutes past the hour, picking up your calls here. Dennis in Elmhurst, Illinois, listening to WCPT. Hey, Dennis, what's on your mind today?
Thanks for taking my call. You know, the evangelical right wing, the Christian right wing, the first part of that word, Christian, is Christ. And somewhere in, I think it's Timothy 20, or Matthew 25, it says, you know, I was naked and you fed me.
Yes, it's called the parable of the sheep and goats. Yeah.
Yes, and to me, Christ is the first woke person.
Yeah.
If you follow that thinking.
Yeah, there's a bumper sticker. Jesus was the original liberal.
Yeah, exactly. I think I'd like one of those.
Yeah, Jesus was woke. That would be a great bumper sticker. Ziggy, if you're listening.
Give us a bumper sticker.
Yeah, there you go.
The other thing I wanted to talk to you about is, it's got to be 2 years ago. You had a discussion about how much money, tax money, comes from blue states and how much money comes from red states to the federal government, and what we send in versus what they get.
Right.
You know, I think one of the states had something like $2 coming back for every dollar they spend.
Yeah, there are some red states that get as much as $3 for every dollar they send to D.C., and there are some blue states that get as much as 60 cents back for every dollar they send to D.C. Yeah, the blue states subsidize the red states. That's the bottom line. Generally, there's a couple of exceptions, but generally that's the case.
Why can't we maybe get a law that says, okay, for every dollar you send, we get $1 back?
I have suggested that. I have suggested that there should be, you know, an amendment to the IRS code or whatever. I don't know. I mean, part of the problem is that not all of that money that's going to the or to the red states is going to the state government. A lot of that is going as Social Security payments to retired people or disabled, in particular disabled people. There's an enormous amount of disability in the red states. A lot of it having to do with drug addiction. And, you know, people who got caught up in OxyContin and whatnot. And so, you know, it's tough you can't just cut them off. What you need to do is force them to raise their taxes. And, you know, which they do not want to do, especially the taxes on their rich people. I mean, these red states really, really coddle their billionaires. But I'm with you, Dennis. I think it should be done, and I think it should be done tomorrow. Thank you very much for the call. Irene in Lantana, Florida. Am I saying it right?
It's Lantana, Florida.
Lantana.
Yes. Hi, Tom. I heard you earlier talking about having to go physically into the voters' registration offices to request the mail-in ballot, and it's something that I did very simply, only took a second or two. You can do it online.
Oh, you can
register
in Florida. Oh,
yeah,
great. Well,
yeah.
thank you for correcting me on that.
Now, I'm in Palm Beach County, where Benedict Donald also has a home. Anyway, I can tell you that I'm pretty sure it's in the entire state that you can register, you can, request vote by mail. And what I have done is always requested the vote by mail. And then when COVID and everything was, happening, I put a mask on and I stood online, socially distanced and stuff, because I do like to physically go in and vote in person. But just having that backup, just in case I couldn't, to me was, and then you drop it off at a supervisor's office if you don't trust the post office, too. But I don't want anyone to think that, oh, that's too much trouble, I have to go in and re-register or ask for the mail-in ballot. No, you can do it online.
Thank you.
So
how do you
with that
find the
said,
website?
It's in Palm Beach County. It's the Supervisor of Elections office that I go to. And actually, after voting, I can track my ballot, to when I guess one time I did mail it in, and I was able to do it online, tracking. But this is Palm Beach County Supervisor of Election. Wendy Satori Link is our current, head of the elections. And when you call there, they are the dearest people in the world answering all our questions.
That's great. Sean, thanks so much for the information. I appreciate it. It's great to hear from you. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
If you're a corporate...
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We take life back.
University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Crash of 2016, one of my favorites. In her writings, this is from page 62, by the way, a middle-class primer is the chapter title. In her writings, which have become foundational for libertarian theology, author Ayn Rand suggested that the only purpose of government should be to prevent oppression by force. What she neglected to consider was all the force inherent in nature. If you're hungry, there is the force of biology. If you're homeless, you confront the force of winds, storms, ice, and rain. If you're sick, you confront the ravages and force of disease. These were the forces that provoked the first governments, the first communities, the first clans and tribes, the first nation states. It's easy for libertarian elitists, such as multimillionaire TV talking heads or college kids reading Atlas Shrugged, to talk about how there should be no government beyond police, the army, and the courts. They all have enough resources that they don't need to deal with the forces of raw nature.
And that explains why billionaires would bankroll libertarian-leaning think tanks that will, when the crash comes with its full force, tell us it was caused by big government. However, in the real world, humans must confront both nature and other humans, which is why we create governments and why we create economies. But it wasn't until 1776 when Thomas Jefferson placed John Locke's right to life, liberty, and property, or replaced it, with life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that the idea of a large class of working people had the ability to pursue happiness, the middle class. It wasn't until 1776 that that was even seriously considered as a cornerstone obligation to government. This is also the first time in history that the word happiness had ever appeared in any nation's formative documents, as Jefferson wrote in 1817 to Dr. John Manners, quote, "The evidence of this natural right, like that to our right of life, liberty, the use of our faculties, the pursuit of happiness is not left to the feeble and sophisticated investigations of reason, but is impressed on the sense of every man." As Jefferson realized, with no government interference by setting the rules of the game of business and fair taxation, there could be no broad middle class, maybe a sliver of small business and artisans, but the vast majority of us would be the working poor under the yoke of elites. The economic royalists know this, which gets to the root of why they set out to destroy government's involvement in the economy. After all, in a middle-class economy, they may have to give up some of their power, and some of the higher end of their wealth may even be redistributed, horrors of horrors, for schools, parks, libraries, and other things that support a healthy middle-class society but are not needed by the rich, who live in a parallel but separate world from the rest of us. As Jefferson laid out in his 1816 letter to Samuel Kercheval, a totally free market where corporations reign supreme, just like the oppressive governments of old, could transform America, quote, "until the bulk of the society is reduced to be mere automatons of misery, to have no sensibilities left but for sinning and suffering. Then begins indeed the bella omnium in omnia, which some philosophers observing to be so general in this world have mistaken it for the natural instead of the abusive state of man." Although this may come as a sudden realization to many, we've really known it all our lives. In fact, in the 6,000-year history of the civilized world, a middle class emerging in any nation has been such a rarity as to be largely historically invisible. The United States has had two great periods of what we today call a middle class. The first was from the 1700s to the mid-1800s and was fueled by virtually free land for settlers, stolen from the Indians, and free labor, slavery in the South and indentured immigrants in the North. The result was, as de Tocqueville pointed out, the most well-educated, politically active, middle-class non-aristocrats in the world. The second period didn't take hold until after World War II, during my dad's lifetime. Unlike the first, which was fueled by free land and slaves, the second had to be carefully constructed with specific and what some might define as socialist policies put in place during the New Deal, which asserted more democratic control over the economy and workplace in order to keep the economic royalists in check. To both stimulate and balance the domestic economy, FDR reinstituted progressive taxation, which gave workers more to spend and gave the rich an incentive to pay their workers better to maintain a stable workplace, since if they took the money themselves, it would just mostly go to taxes, thus stimulating demand for more goods and services. Progressive taxation has a long history. As Jefferson said in a 1785 letter to James Madison, quote, "Another means of silently lessening the inequality of property is to exempt from taxation all below a certain point and to tax the higher portions of property in geometrical progression as they rise." FDR eventually hiked the top income tax rate paid by the super rich in America to 90%. This had a twofold effect. First, it held income inequality in check and ushered in an era of equal income and a growth among all classes. Unlike the Gilded Age, when the economy grew at a blistering pace but the gains were afforded only to the robber barons, the period between 1947 and 1980 saw unparalleled equitable growth. During these 30-plus years, the poorest fifth in America saw a 116% increase in their incomes. The middle fifth, 111% increase. Top 5% only saw an 85% increase. All income classes shared in the prosperity of the times when the top marginal income tax rate was above 70%. The second effect of a high income tax rate was to bring stability to the economy. And then it goes through the whole explanation of how that worked. The book is The Crash of 2016.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. A lot to talk about here in this hour as well. First off, a Geeky Science. I was going to get to this in the second hour, and I missed it. So this our Geeky Science for the day to start out, and then we'll get to politics. Wild blueberries. I've talked about this before. Blueberries seem to have an effect on cognition. Well, you know, it's apparently very, very real. This was a study that was done with older adults, 65 to 80 years old. And it was a substantial group of people. This was published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. It included 61 healthy older adults between 65 and 80, all with good cognitive abilities and no chronic diseases. And one group received it was powder. This was a wild blueberry powder. One group contained a packet with 26 grams of the wild blueberry powder. Equivalent to 178 grams of fresh wild blueberries. And the other group received a package that looked and tasted like blueberry powder, but it contained fiber, vitamin C, and flavoring. And so it did not have the substances that are believed to be beneficial in blueberries, the polyphenols, the anthocyanins, and procyanins, flavanols, and phenolic acids, if I'm pronouncing these correctly. And they had them use the powder for 12 weeks, 3 months. And what they found was that the adults, the elderly adults, 65 to 80, who took the blueberry powder, compared to the placebo group, had measurably better and healthier blood vessels and performed better on cognitive tasks compared to the group that had the placebo. Results showed that consuming wild blueberry powder improved vascular function, the ability of blood vessels to expand when blood flow increases. It's called flow-mediated dilation. It was much better in the group that consumed the blueberry powder. 24-hour systolic blood pressure, that's the top number, was also lower in the blueberry group. It also improved certain aspects of cognition. Participants in the blueberry group showed better immediate word recall and performance in the switching task compared to the placebo group. So eat your blueberries, right? And apparently blueberry powder and dried blueberries are just as good as fresh blueberries, although fresh blueberries are always wonderful things. All right, getting to the news of the day for this hour. You know, we've talked quite a bit about how if you end up on a Medicare Advantage plan instead of real Medicare, with real Medicare, Medicare is not between you and your doctor. If your doctor says that you should get a procedure that Medicare doesn't like or thinks is fraudulent, you get the procedure anyway, but afterwards, Medicare will go back and try to recover that from your doctor, not from you. I mean, you'll probably never even know about it. Medicare does have, you know, rigorous fraud prevention stuff going on, but they do not get between you and your doctor. Medicare Advantage is always between you and your doctor. If you want to, you know, if your doctor says that you need an MRI or you need a blood test or you need anything, you need surgery, anything, it has to be approved by your insurance company before it can happen. And if it's not approved, they'll refuse to pay for it. And very often they refuse to pay for it anyway, and they turn it down, 17% of the time, in fact, according to the New York Times, the last piece I read in the New York Times. Well, interestingly, these same insurance companies, the ones that are mentioned in the New York Times piece yesterday about this, the title is Insurers Deny Medical Care for the Poor at High Rates. These companies are Aetna, Elevance Health, Molina Healthcare, and United Healthcare, but apparently this is true pretty much across the board. And the way it works is that some states actually hire these companies to administer their Medicaid programs. Medicaid is the health insurance that's available to low-income people. And some states administer Medicaid themselves. Other states hand it off to one of these insurance companies to do it for them. And then the insurance companies insert themselves between you and Medicaid and the money, you know, and between you and your doctor, basically. And Reed Abelson wrote this piece, and this is how it starts out. Private health insurance companies paid by Medicaid denied millions of requests for care for low-income Americans with little oversight from federal and state authorities. Medicaid covers 87 million people, often contracts with companies to reimburse hospitals and doctors for treatment and to manage an individual's medical care. about 3/4 of people enrolled in Medicaid receive services through these private companies. And here's what's interesting. These private companies are paid on a per-person basis, not on the basis of what you need. So if you're, a healthy 65-year-old and you're on Medicaid and you never get any services, the company gets paid the exact same amount as if you're really sick and you need to have, 3 different medications and 2 surgeries this year. So what the health insurance companies do, since they get the money no matter what, is, they have, this is called a perverse incentive. They have a strong incentive to say no to absolutely every time you or your doctor says, but wait a minute, I need this medication, or I need this surgery, or, what about this lump in my breast, or, what about my, my PSA went through the roof, and they said, no. And interestingly, they say the for-profit insurance companies, including Aetna, Elevance Health, Molina Healthcare, and United Healthcare, operate some Medicaid plans that denied medical care under requests for prior authorization of services by rates that were greater than 25% in 2019. Another 8.4 million were enrolled in plans with above average denial rates, but not from those 4 companies that I just named, with denial rates of 15 to 25%. Now, when you get denied by Medicare Advantage, and that happens, if my recollection is correct, around 17% of the time, you have the ability, most people don't know it and they don't do it, but you have the ability to go to Medicare and challenge that. With Medicaid, though, generally speaking, you don't. And it talks about this. They say the concern over inappropriate denials, by the way, is not limited to Medicaid. I'm quoting from the New York Times. Last year, the same investigators examining denials among private Medicare Advantage plans found that some of the care that was rejected may, in fact, have been medically necessary. The companies denied 1 out of 8 requests in 2018, roughly 2 times the rate under Medicare Advantage. So on Medicaid, it's 1 in 8. Under Medicare Advantage, it's 1 in 16. Unlike Medicare, if an insurer refuses to authorize treatments, patients are not automatically provided with an outside medical opinion as part of their appeal. They are entitled to a state hearing. Oh, I stand corrected. But whether you're entitled to it and whether you get it might be 2 completely different things. Rosemary Bartholomew, who helped lead the team that came up with this report, said, in the absence of federal requirements, we see these tools being used inconsistently. The Center for Medicare Services, CMS, says its plans to review the report's findings. Right. Elevance, the for-profit insurer previously known as Anthem, had plans with denial rates that varied from 6 to 34%, while United Healthcare had plans that had rates ranging from 7 to 27%. We need to get these private for-profit companies out of our healthcare. These are like giant leeches attached to our bodies, sucking out the blood of our healthcare system. And basically one of the main reasons why our healthcare system is in such trouble. Other news of the day, massive protests going on in Israel right now because the parliament, the Knesset, just passed a law that Netanyahu has been requesting to reduce the powers of the Supreme Court. Now, Netanyahu himself is under indictment for multiple felonies for corruption and bribery and things like that. And I don't know for certain that he wants to gut the court because of that. But Israel doesn't have a constitution. And so the court bases their decisions on what's called a reasonableness standard. And Netanyahu is saying, we want to be unreasonable, and screw your reasonableness, basically. Netanyahu, there's 120 people, there's 120 seats in parliament. Netanyahu, his coalition government, controls 64 of those. And they all 64 voted with him. Protesters now have chained themselves to fences and blocked the entrance to the Knesset. This is an article from Jake Johnson over on Common Dreams. He notes, while the Israeli Supreme Court has been an extremely weak check on the government's systematic oppression of Palestinians and illegal land confiscations, the proposed judicial overhaul could completely eliminate any remaining barriers to far-right efforts to dramatically expand settlements and further roll back Palestinians' rights. It's incredible. Netanyahu's government has proposed a judicial overhaul that would restrict the Supreme Court's use of reasonableness in striking down laws, appointments, and other actions. I mean, it's just remarkable what they're doing. I mean, we're seeing strong men, Netanyahu in Israel, Donald Trump in the United States, Putin in Russia, Orban in Hungary, Erdogan in Turkey, El-Sisi in Egypt. Now the latest incarnation of the Marcos family in the Philippines, the son of the former dictator of, well, it just goes on and on, you know.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
They're all trying to rise together, and there's like this international coalition of right wingers. And welcome back. Sean in Santa Rosa, California. Hey, Sean, didn't we already talk?
We didn't. I'm sorry. I was trying to get through to the Secretary of State of California with regards to my question.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I put you on the air, and you were talking to somebody else. So what's up?
I apologize for that.
That's all good.
My question is about voting rights and voting legitimacy.
Mm-hmm.
In looking at what California has, they have what's called a motor voter registration for when you get your driver's license.
Right. Every state has that. That was a law that was passed in 1993 called the National Voting Registration Act, the NVRA.
I appreciate that. That's what I saw written. But my question is, I talked to my local county registrar. They say they do not check to see whether someone's a citizen or not. They use the information from the state DMV just to verify whether their address, their name is correct. And if they check on their license, the driver's license or an ID, just a checkbox to say that they are a U.S. citizen, there's no way particularly to define whether that's actually true or not, and they will automatically be given a ballot, which will come in the mail to them, and they'll fill it out and vote.
Right.
So what is your, seriously, what is your thinking about ways to actually verify? Because I do want just citizens of the United States to vote in our elections.
Right.
There's a whole process for someone who's coming in. We have, to become citizens, and there's a whole thing on the Secretary of State's website about that.
Right.
What is your take on a way to actually verify whether these people who come in sign up for a driver's license because they need to get around, or an ID card to live here, and they're not citizens, and there's no way to check, apparently.
No, you're getting redundant here, Sean. So here's my take on this. Number one, the Real ID law requires every state, when they issue a driver's license, to confirm your citizenship, or you don't get that little star on there that gets you through airports. And that becomes law, by the way, I think October this year, or maybe it's next year, that they keep moving it back. Because here in Oregon, we were the last state to offer Real ID, what's called Real ID. So if your driver's license has a star, it means you're a citizen. If it doesn't have a star, it means you're not a citizen. So they do check citizenship. They're required by law, by federal law, to do that. So the person you spoke with may have been giving you misinformation, number one. Number two, there are penalties for voting when you're not a citizen. You can go to prison. And so I would be surprised if people who are not citizens would want to vote, would try to vote. I'm guessing probably a few might just, not even realizing that they can't. But But my guess is that the percentage of this slipping through is extremely low. But because of the Real ID law, I don't even see where this would be an issue, Sean. I got to run. Thanks a lot for the call. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So right-wing billionaires are major funders of the GOP, and the GOP has been promoting basically a death cult. You got Ron DeSantis most recently signing a law that eliminates legal liability for medical professionals who refuse to provide services to people in crisis if it violates their moral, ethical, or religious convictions. The Republican Party has picked up from the Democrats, actually, ironically, weirdly, you know, the old Dixiecrats, the old Southern racists. They used to be Democrats prior to 1964, but then, you know, the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act and all that. You know, and Nixon came in along in '68 with the Southern strategy, and now they're all Republicans. So why are these right-wing billionaires willing to support this death cult? Is it really just about taxes and deregulation? There's a piece about it at thehartmannreport.com. Check it out. "22 minutes past the hour." So Greg Abbott has got his floating barrier in the Rio Grande River, and it has already, one pregnant woman gotten snared in it and ended up miscarrying. The hospitals are reporting numerous people showing up with severe lacerations and infections from having encountered the razor wire. Parts of the razor wire are underwater, so you don't even see them until you try to swim or walk into them. I mean, this is just cruelty raised to the level of an art form. And it's also a violation of the law. We have a treaty with Mexico, number one, which forbids this. Number two, the waterway is not under the control of the state of Texas. It's under the control of the Army Corps of Engineers. And so everything that Greg Abbott is doing here in this, you know, cruelty performance is just plain old flat out illegal. It's a crime. So people have been complaining to their federal officials, and now the U.S. Department of Justice, this from Kenny Stencil over at commondreams.org, the U.S. Department of Justice has informed Republican Texas Governor Greg Abbott that it intends to file a lawsuit if he doesn't remove the life-threatening buoys his state troopers installed in the Rio Grande earlier this month. This is from a letter from U.S. Assistant Attorney General Todd Kim and the U.S. Attorney Jamie Esparza, the U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Texas. Quote, "The floating barrier at issue here is a structure that obstructs the navigable capacity of the Rio Grande River, which is a navigable water of the United States within the meaning of the Rivers and Harbors Act. Texas does not have authorization from the Army Corps of Engineers to install the floating barrier and did not seek such authorization before doing so." This is just Greg Abbott being an ass. I don't know how to describe it beyond that. Mexico now has officially complained to the United States government. Mexico says that this barrier is a violation of both the 1944 and 1970 treaties on boundaries and water. And then on top of that, it's making it hard for the feds to do their job because they can't now get into the water to save people who might be drowning. We're talking the Border Patrol, the federal officers, because of these barriers. So they're objecting to it too. So it's a mess. So keep an eye on this one. All right, let's pick up your phone calls here. Alyssa in St. Petersburg, Florida. Hey, Alyssa, what's on your mind today?
Well, hello. I'm very pleased to speak with you. I just want to follow up on the woman from Palm Beach. And in Florida, it's very easy to vote by mail. You just have to re-up every election cycle.
Right. Well, that's the new law, is that
you have to sign the name and you're re-upped.
Okay, so you do it online too, Alyssa?
Well, I check my status online. Mm-hmm. I live in a very obscure area of St. Pete. It's called Leoman, and we only vote for fire chief, and there's no election for fire chief this year. So my registration is good till next year.
Well, you do vote for president and Senate and House of Representatives. Then.
Yes.
Governor?
Yes, but there's nothing this year.
Oh, this
there's
year,
no school board or
Right. Well, the concern is 2024. I mean, it looks like DeSantis has purged all the vote by mail registrants in anticipation of 2024.
He is not. It's up to the supervisors of election.
According to this new law that he passed, the state requires it. Now, the supervisor of elections might not have gotten around to it because it's got to be done by the end of this year.
I don't think that's the way the law reads.
Well, that was the article I read. It's.
I agree with you that you read the article.
Yeah, I believe it was from the New York Times. I'd have to dig it out and find it.
Yeah, I don't get New York Times, but yeah.
Yeah.
I live in Florida.
Yeah. Okay. Well, good luck. I hope you don't get purged from the rolls, Alyssa, and let us know if you do. Okay.
I don't think I will.
Okay. Good luck. Bye-bye.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's 27 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with your calls right on the other side of this break.
Today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club, we're featuring The Inner Level by Richard Wilkinson and Kate Pickett. It's a new book. The subtitle is How More Equal Societies Reduce Stress, Restore Sanity, and Improve Everyone's Well-Being. This is in Chapter 6, The Misconception of Meritocracy, page 161. Boris Johnson, the former mayor of London who became Foreign Secretary in Theresa May's Conservative government in 2016, was educated at Eton and Oxford. Giving the Margaret Thatcher lecture to a think tank in 2013, he articulated the view that economic equality will never be possible because some people are simply too stupid to catch up with the rest of society. Quote, whatever you may think of the value of IQ tests, it is surely relevant to a conversation about equality that as many as 16% of our species have an IQ below 85, he said. Comparing society to a box of cornflakes, he praised inequality for creating the conditions under which the brightest triumph. Quote, the harder you shake the pack, the easier it will be for some cornflakes to get to the top, end quote. Inequality, quote, is essential for the spirit of envy and keeping up with the Joneses that is, like greed, a valuable spur to economic activity. Whether or not Johnson is quite as clever a cornflake as he presumably likes to think, he certainly is not in command of the facts. Nobel Prize-winning economists, as well as the OECD and IMF, have shown how inequality, far from spurring on economic growth, leads to stagnation and instability. Social mobility is reduced where income inequality is greatest, and far from inspiring innovation, it turns out that there are actually slightly more patents granted per head of population in more equal countries. And as we've seen in the previous chapters, there's also the undeniable human cost of our fixation with keeping up with the Joneses. But Boris is far from alone in his misconceptions about the relationships between inequality and ability. The idea that people are naturally endowed with differences in ability, intelligence, or talent, and that those differences then determine how far up the social ladder they reach, is a powerful popular justification for social hierarchy. The presumption is that we live in a meritocracy in which the key to status is ability. We think of society as shaped like a pyramid. The supposition is that most people are near the bottom or only a little above it because the bulk of the population lack the special talents that we imagine people need to get to the top. The belief that differences in ability are the main influence on where people end up on the social ladder is so strong that we tend to judge everyone's personal worth, ability, and intelligence by their position in society. Nor is this confined simply to how we judge others. It also affects how people see themselves. Those at the top often believe that they're there because they are naturally endowed with plenty of the right stuff, just as many of those near the bottom think that their low status reflects a lack of ability. That picture, however, is not supported by the latest scientific evidence. First, research now shows that a very major part of what happens to people and where they end up is the result of totally unpredictable influences and occurrences amounting to pure luck. Second, aside from luck, the most important links that exist between ability and status operate in the opposite direction of that imagined by most people. Rather than different endowments of talents determining position in the hierarchy, it's much nearer the truth to say that position in the hierarchy determines abilities, interests, and talents. But let's address luck first. Whether or not we consider ourselves successful, most of us can probably look back across our own life histories and recognize the roles that luck and chance have played in getting us to where we are. We're perhaps lucky with schools or teachers, with the questions on an important exam, with some nameless person dealing with university applications, or we got on well with an interviewer when applying for a job. Perhaps a chance meeting was important, or perhaps an opportunity for promotion came up unexpectedly. Finding a life partner is just as important for our quality of life as our career or income, but we are far happier to acknowledge that chance and luck played a key role in meeting that person than we are in acknowledging luck's role in our career. No one minds mentioning the chance meeting, the circumstances that put you both at ease with each other, or the shared interest that might easily have gone unrecognized. The role of chance makes people's lives highly unpredictable. Although there are huge social class biases in social mobility, there are at the same time vast numbers of people moving up or down the social ladder in ways that even the most detailed analysis of parenting and ability fail to predict. Similarly, although there are differences of perhaps 10 years in the average life expectancy of upper and lower social classes, that explains very little of the individual differences in how long people live. Inevitably, some rich people will die young, and some people live in poverty to a great age. And as some public health mavericks used to say, even if you exercised, ate healthy, and didn't smoke, your most likely cause of death was still heart disease. In addition to all this, there may be a large element of chance in whatever our experiences, including subjective experiences, trigger the kind of epigenetic changes affecting subsequent development that we discussed in the last chapter. Just as the development of weather systems is sometimes said to be so chaotic it can be changed by the flapping of a butterfly's wings, so what amounts to chance events at the social or the cellular level are now thought to play a very substantial part in our lives. So much so that scientists have worried that if random chance and luck are such important determinants of whether or not an individual becomes sick, gets good exam results, or has a good marriage, it becomes difficult to understand causal pathways at all and to do anything about preventing or remedying bad outcomes. The book, The Inner Level by Wilkinson and Pickett.
From international trade policy to immigration policy to housing, we've got all kinds of topics. The wars between Republicans and Democrats, the Republican efforts to induce fascism in the United States. A great selection of opinions will be found over at HartmannReport.com. And welcome back to the second half of the third hour of our program. Rich in Indianapolis, Indiana. Hey, Rich, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's up?
You're very welcome, and good afternoon to yourself. As you were talking, as I was waiting, you were talking about the Rio Grande and U.S. Border Patrol, and I was thinking about the Spree River. I mean, it was absolutely like right there with people getting shot in Spree by the Stasi as they were trying to get to the west. Am I saying the name of the river wrong?
I'm not sure. Was this, I'm unfamiliar with the river. Was this a river that separated East and West Berlin or East and West Germany?
Yeah. East and West Berlin.
Okay.
I thought that the river that went through town was called the Spree.
It may be. I'm not that, I've only been to Berlin a few times. I lived over, I lived in the Frankenwald, which is quite a ways from there.
Okay.
Sorry.
Well,
although I have been through Checkpoint Charlie. It's back when it was Checkpoint Charlie. Back when, when East Germany was East Germany, but we had to go underground to get into East Germany. It didn't occur to me we were going under a river. It may have, because there was this giant wall there, anyway.
Okay, well, the reason that I called was that there was a statement that was picked up by News Cycle today about DeSantis further enhancing the ignorance around January 6th as he's doubling down with, this wasn't a riot, it was a protest, and it was very unfortunate.
Right, and it was not an insurrection, was his phrase.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that clarification. I was remembered because you sent me on to reading Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol more carefully, and you had picked out a wonderful and important segment wherein it's the last minutes of Scrooge's Ghost of Christmas Present, and he sees the two children of man, ignorance and want. And the statement that the Spirit says is, beware them both and beware ignorance most, because across its brow is written doom. And then the statement that really jives here is, admit it for your fractious purpose and make it worse. And by the end, fractious purpose is the reason that ignorance is inflicted on people so that we can be misled and our behaviors controlled.
Yeah.
You tell us something and we're being led around by the nose with a lie, and they got us.
Yeah, it's a great analysis,
and they've been
Rich.
doing it forever.
Yeah, Dickens was right.
Just forever.
No, I mean, Socrates, or Aristotle, wrote about this, back in the day. So, it's one of the reasons why, Jefferson founded the first free university. It's the reason why Abraham Lincoln, with the Morrill Act, created 76 free universities in the United States, the land-grant colleges like MSU. Because, as Jefferson said, you can't have a free people and an ignorant people. If you want to try and have both, you want to try and have something that never was and never will be. I'm paraphrasing from memory here, but it's pretty close. So
I wrote a short little poem. It's just 40 words. May I read it quickly, please? Thanks. It's entitled Collaborationist Vichy. And what's important about the title is the IST on the end of collaborationist. So let folks understand that that's super important as they look up language. Okay, collaborationist Vichy. The Nazi is your moral enemy. The Nazi is a monster. It must not persist. As it is offered deference, it assumes power to violate the rights of those used as scapegoats, to unite the chauvinist nationalism to favor the Nazi.
Yeah.
Stop the Nazi. Stop the Nazi.
Yeah.
And this is after Ilya Ehrenberg. I don't know if you remember Ilya Ehrenberg's statements during World War II. He's quite the guy trying to keep the Red Army together and fight back those waves of tanks with their own waves of tanks.
Yeah.
All right, brother.
Okay, Rich, thanks for the call.
Man.
That was a good one. Appreciate it. Orlando in Whittier, California. Hey, Orlando, what's on your mind today?
Hey, first off, just wanted to thank you, Tom, for being on the air. Appreciate your efforts to educate the listeners and also save democracy. I'm calling about the sort of feedback on that one caller on vote by mail. He said that Republicans are promoting it, and he was worried that, of course, that it's going to be somehow hijacked. And well, I used to vote in person, but I have gone to vote by mail since 2016, and I live in California, LA County. What I like about the vote by mail, it's convenient. I can study and and then I take my ballot, and I don't take it to the I don't put it in the mail. I don't put it to the post office. I go directly to the county register office by my house. So it's like leaving in the hands. I mean, not that I don't trust the post office; they're excellent. But and then the thing that's the beauty of vote by mail is within a day or so you can confirm online that your vote has been tabulated.
Right.
So I think there's some things in place to make sure that your vote didn't get hijacked.
California does a great job with this.
Yeah, I'm more concerned about what you were talking about earlier, which is voter suppression laws. I don't think they do that much here in California, but they do, by cities. We had a whole fight here where there's voter suppression here in the city of Whittier where I live, where we had a big fight and we changed elections from district from at-large to district. But I think what really concerned me about this election coming up is Trump's already insistence, or his promoting the narrative of, quote, election interference by the Biden Justice Department. You know, I believe he actually joined early because he was worried about getting indicted, and he's, you know.
Oh yeah. In fact, people around him have told the media that the reason that he announced early was because he thought that would prevent an indictment.
And he's already got one coming. And
yeah, he's got over 70 charges between New York and Florida, and now you've got Georgia and possibly other states as well. You know, Wisconsin's looking into this, Michigan's looking into this. I don't know if Dana Nessel is just going to go after the 16 people in Michigan that she's named, or if she's going to at some point add Donald Trump to that. I mean, it's getting wild. Plus, you know, what's coming up in D.C. with Jack Smith.
It's just a sad commentary on our political system that someone like Trump, with all this, I mean, yeah, he's being indicted because he's a criminal. Do you ever think about that? Because he's a crime boss.
He's a serial criminal. I mean, his presidency was a crime spree. His candidacy was a crime spree. And now we're discovering that in 2020, when he was running for re-election, he raised $1.2 billion, and $600 million of it went into a private corporation that Jared set up to pass the money out to members of the family. I mean, it's not just a crime; it's a grift.
Yeah, well, I don't know why the Republicans aren't investigating that. You know what I'm saying?
Because they don't care. Republicans are professional grifters. If somebody gets away with an amazing grift like that, $600 million grift, all the Republicans are going, "Wow, how do I do that?"
Yeah, going back to the election, I think that Biden should be. You know, it looks like he's going to be the nominee, but I think we should still constructively criticize things that he hasn't done. You know,
nothing wrong with you know, leaning on the president, and you know, as long as it doesn't lead people to decide, what the hell, I'm not going to vote. I mean, that's the problem. The whole circular firing squad. I mean, there are some commentators on the left, in quotes, and you know, sadly, who just can't say a good thing. You know, they think it's so hip to be cynical, and it's not hip to be cynical. It's not cool to be cynical. It's cynical to be cynical, and you know, and cynicism is a destructive thing.
No, I agree with you, Senator. Some I don't have to get into who they are, but I don't think that everything the Democrats do is wrong. I mean, if that's some of the narrative in some of these stations, I do. That's why I don't just listen to you, by the way. You know, I read The Nation, I read books, you know, I check sources, Democracy Now!, there's The Nation magazine. I mean, get all that.
Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff out there. There's a lot of good stuff out there.
I just want to depend on your show. I have to go to other sources, man.
Yeah, that's good. I encourage that. Orlando, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. It's nice to hear from you. David in North Miami Beach, Florida. Hey, David, what's on your mind today?
Hey, y'all, and hello, Chicago. I stream that station.
Oh, yeah, you're listening to WCPT on their stream. That's great.
Right, because they're less likely to interrupt you with the words, hey, y'all.
So what's up, David?
Right. Part of the craziness of Miami-Dade County, both the Miami Herald newspaper and the election headquarters used to be in historic downtown Miami, but now they're both in Doral, dangerously close to Trump Doral Golf Course. I never understood why they did that, but we're stuck with it. So in my run for mayor, I have to go visit them to register. But speaking as someone who is an actual Florida history teacher, unlike Ron DeSantis, I'm wondering, is he going to ban references to the Hartford Convention, how the North almost seceded during the War of 1812? Is he going to outlaw historic references to the Mayflower Compact, or is he going to see that as too communist, too kibbutzim for his taste?
Wow.
Because I know he taught history in Georgia.
Yeah, in a private school. And apparently partied hard with the teenage girls there.
What could go wrong? Yeah. Whereas Charlie Crist, before he was governor, he certified me. Unfortunately, down here, there's 10 individual social studies merged into one. So if I was still licensed, my history background could be pitted against, say, an economics major against, I don't know, business.
Well, I think the criteria will probably be more political affiliation and perspective than academic credentials. But DeSantis is on a jihad against education in general. David, thank you for the call, and good on you for being an actual history teacher. That's marvelous. We'll be back. It's 46 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
That was what my dad wanted to be when he grew up. He wanted to be a professor of history. He had to drop out of college, though, because Mom got pregnant with me. So I guess I carry on the tradition. And welcome back. Rory in Newport Richey, Florida. Hey, Rory, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I'm in Pasco County, Florida, heavily Republican area. All vote-by-mail ballots or anybody to put in there expired in 2022.
Okay.
I just want to clarify that. Okay, it's deleted, so you have to re-register. Okay.
This year.
They sent us. Well, I don't know if you have to register this year, but if you want to vote in the 2024 election, the kicker is that I and I'm sure hundreds of thousands of others were led to believe that this was good through at least 2024. We didn't have to re-up or anything with this. Also, in my case, okay, registered Democrat, I wrenched my wrist, and my signature, and when I voted in 2020 for Biden, my signature was a little off. I don't know what they compared it to. And I literally got a call from someone from the county election office, and it said, you have to fill out an affidavit stating that this is your real signature, blah, blah, blah. And the kicker with that is that from now on, this is what they told me, this will be the signature with my wrench wrist that we will base your voter registration on and see if it's legitimate or not.
Wow.
So now, it's thick, man.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I just want to. I normally I don't call you, but I just want to. The two women that called you before and talking about how easy everything is. No, there are hundreds of thousands of Floridians that think that they're still registered. I received a little tiny postcard in June of this year, 2023, saying vote by mail expiration notice. I had no idea.
Wow.
Okay, so I mean, you got.
Well, they might have been Republicans calling in. Who knows?
No, it's not Republicans calling. This is from the actual election. Brian
calling
Croy.
into my show. But my.
I don't know. No, I think these people are just they're older. I'm old too, but they're just maybe ignorant or it could be. You never know. I mean, I don't want to be, but. Tom, it's really bad down here.
Oh, I know. And not only that, this is going to happen in every single red state and probably some blue states. The Republicans are organizing, the party, the GOP officially, is organizing an army. They're trying to get 50,000 people nationwide to show up at polling places and challenge voters' signatures. And the main ones that they're going to challenge are vote-by-mail signatures. And if your vote-by-mail signature gets challenged, then your ballot becomes essentially a provisional ballot, which means that it's not counted immediately. It's set in a separate pile, and then you get notified, and you've got to go down and heal the ballot, fix the ballot. In other words, show that you actually are you.
Exactly what happened to me.
Exactly.
And I didn't have to go down to the election office, but I had to send an actual affidavit legal.
Yep.
And now they're going to use that. And when I sign again, because my wrist is okay and I can write normally, they'll say, oh, You know,
Looks
hey,
different
this
again.
doesn't match your signature.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So
It's terrible, Tom.
so in a situation like that, you want to vote in person. Rory, thanks for the heads up. Thank you. We'll be right back. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. So we have this major culture war going on in the United States. You've got Republicans trying to ban abortion. They're trying to ban books. Not just trying to, they're actually doing all of these things. Banning books, banning trans girls in sports, attacking basically the entire queer community. Whatever they can to try to sow division and hate, promoting Nazi memes, talking about how, Jews are paying to have black and brown people replace white people and all this kind of stuff. Why are billionaires doing this? Why are they funding these people? I mean, billionaires don't care about crime. They live in gated communities with private security. They don't care about public schools. Their kids go to private schools. They don't care about public transportation. They fly in private jets. Oh, yeah, that's right. If they can get us fighting against each other, if they can get us hating each other, we will ignore their efforts to cut their taxes and deregulate their industries. There's a whole video about it at tom.tv. Check it out. "52 minutes past the hour, picking up your call. Gary in Garfield, New Jersey. Hey, Gary. Thanks for listening on SiriusXM. What's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. How are you?
Great. What's up?
Long time listener, first time caller.
Well, thank you, Gary.
Last week you mentioned Democrats in name only. You mentioned Josh Gottheimer, who's in the district I live in, 5th District, New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
Just as a point of reference, that district was Republican since 1930, and he flipped it in 2016.
Mm-hmm.
So, and he's up to 8 points by the Cook Report now for the next election. So, even though I don't agree with 100% of what he says, and he's part of the problem solvers and everything else, it's still another notch in the Democratic belt rather than having one of the most egregious congressmen that they had in that district, Scott Garrett, for many years.
Right.
And he basically got rid of him at that point. So
no, I agree that a bad Democrat is better than no Democrat, because the first vote that they take in the House of Representatives, and for that matter in the Senate, is for the leadership. And you want a Democrat, Democratic Speaker of the House, and that requires a certain number of Democrats. Period. Full stop.
Yeah, right. And like I said, the district had even gone for Trump in 2016, but in 2020, Biden won the district.
Yeah.
So it's a small crawl, a creep, but at least it's happening because it is a very gerrymandered district because it covers the border, the northern border of Jersey, which is pretty much moderate to liberal, but then goes on the west part of it towards Pennsylvania, which is very, very conservative.
Right.
And that's where Garrett was from, and that's why he won all the time.
Right. I get it.
So,
okay. Gary, thanks for the information.
Anytime. Take care, Tom.
Thanks. You too. Darcy in Silver City, New Mexico. Hey, Darcy, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. It's always good to hear your informative and sweet voice.
Thank you.
I was surfing around on the net some months back, and I'm not sure where I was. I think it was a NASA site, and they were saying by the year 2050, 5 billion people in the world, half the world's population, would not have enough water to drink at least 1 month out of the year. And I was wondering if you were familiar with that.
I'm not specifically familiar with that, but I do know that right now, over 1 billion people don't have access to sanitary water or septic, which is pretty mind-boggling. So, it doesn't surprise me.
One of your callers a bit ago said that we have a treaty with Canada that we can't take water out of the Great Lakes.
Right.
And I am sure that if the poo really hit the fan, this government would break that treaty.
Probably. Yeah, probably.
And if I was a young person, I'd be looking to move up north to a blue state and get myself a rowboat and some 5-gallon jugs.
Yeah. I can tell you, we worry about earthquakes here in Oregon, but and we did have, 3 summers ago that 3 days in a row where it was 116 degrees, but But generally speaking, the weather here is quite tolerable. I mean, you know, we get a couple of weeks of snow in the winter, and we get a couple of weeks of really hot weather in the summer. But, you know, our average temperature is probably in the 60s year-round. And I'm grateful for it, given what's going on. Although I was in Michigan over the weekend, I visited my brother and you know, a bunch of old college friends, and Michigan hasn't been whacked too bad. I don't know if it's the Great Lakes or what, but boy, the South and the rest of the country are just getting hammered right now.
Okay, well, I'll look around. Maybe I can get some more information just for I mean, I won't be around then, but if that's 2050, it won't be that different in 2040 or 2035.
Well, the problem is going to be the lead up to it, which is, you know, which will involve all the migration, all the climate refugees. Right now, it's just a few 100 million climate refugees in the world. It's going to soon be 1 billion. I predict within this decade. I got to run, Darcy. Thank you for the call. And thank you for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us, and that includes you. So get out there, get active, tag you're it, and consider calling your member of Congress and asking them to ask President Biden to declare a climate emergency. After all, if you got power, why not use it, right? We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon. Be good to yourself and the people around you, and stay safe.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!